Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. As always, I'm your host Simon. Today, the Monster of Florence, Italy's Zodiac Killer. Brilliant. Why does Italy have to have a Zodiac Killer as well? Can't we just have one Zodiac Killer? Isn't one enough?
You're joking. Not another one? Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this.
Oh, it's written by Emma. Thank you so much, Emma, the format of the show. If you're new here, I've never read this before. We're going to read it together, dear listener, if you're listening as a podcast, or if you're on YouTube. Hello there. All right, let's get into it. Between 1968 and 1985, a serial killer was hunting couples all over Florence. Or were they? Because, even at the time, the police suspected that there might just be a whole gang out there moving silently through the warm Italian nights, preying on Florence's lovers. And while a single man would ultimately be arrested, doubts remained. Was the Monster of Florence really just one person? Or were his crimes the work of a group, acting out their darkest fantasies together? My initial guess would be that it's not a group, that it is just one person, because to get like a group of people together and be like, let's go commit horrible crimes together, like where there's you're just more likely to get caught because someone's going to be like, oh no, I really regret all those murders we did. If I come clean, can I get out of prison for free? You know, someone's going to grass. But first, some legal matters. While I was writing the script, I learned that more than one kind of police agency was involved in investigating the murders that had been committed by the man who had become known as the Monster of Florence, and that has resulted in some drama. Then I came across terms like carabinieri and investigating judge and finance police, and I wondered if some important information was getting lost in translation. I read up on the basics, but I don't think that I'm knowledgeable enough to explain how the Italian judicial system works or how it all fits together. So I asked our resident Italian, Arnaldo, to explain it instead. Oh, okay, awesome. Little crossover. Arnaldo's another writer for us. Figuring out Italian policing. Okay, so I believe I'm in a good place to explain to our dear listeners how Italian policing works for two reasons. One, I am Italian. B, for 12 exhausting months, I was a member of the Italian police forces as part of my national service. Well, for me, Arnaldo, I had no idea that they had national service in Italy. And for two, I had no idea you were in the police. There we go. First, we have Polizia di Stato, or let me guess, that's the state police. Sometimes I feel like with Romance languages like French or Italian, you just like, let's take police forces. All you do is you swap it round. So you say forces police, and then you say, like, if it's Italian, Forcio Poliziana, or like national service, Service Nazionale. And it's like, oh, look, you speak Italian. The Monster of Florence, Florenzio Monsteria. Yeah. Boom, Italian. What do you think, Arnaldo? Is that accurate? Let me know in the comments. Or just email me. I suppose you could just email me. Because, you know, we're in touch. Because I don't know why I'm explaining this. These folks perform the normal functions you would expect from a modern police force, and their uniform units are mostly seen in large cities and on motorways, where some lucky officers get to drive Lamborghinis. Really? I thought that was just... I've seen those pictures, but I always just thought it was like in the Middle East or whatever. And as like a... not like a tourist thing, but as a showpiece or whatever. Then you have the Carabinieri, a militarized force that performs both military police and civilian police duties. Oh, the military police and the civilian police crossover. Not giving away too much about where I live, exactly, but I live very close to it's not really an army base. I think it's like a barracks of some kind. And there's always, I'm always like, oh, a police car. And you're like, not quite. It's a military police car. That's interesting. It always reminds me of those Jack Reacher books. They are basically the same as the state police, but wear different uniforms and are mostly seen in small and medium towns. Those two forces share some duties with Guardia di Finanza. Let me guess. Financial guard. Or like, what's that called in the UK? They're like financial police? Something like this? What's it called? Is it the Secret Service that do this in America? That do all the money policing? They're specialized, the finance guard. They're a specialized force dealing with fraud, tax evasion, and white-collar crime in general. Who the does that in the UK? Why do I know it's the Secret Service in America, but I don't know what the UK equivalent of, like, the fraud people are? I don't know. Never mind. I want to say Scotland Yard, but I think that's just for all big crimes in general. They also act as a customs office, cracking down on smugglers, drug traffickers, and gun runners. They also have a separate emergency number 117, which I'd recommend you call if you fall victim to some tourist scam. Oh, there you go, that's nice. The presence of so many police forces tends to befuddle non-Italian observers, but this is not unique to Italy, as other European countries feature civilian police alongside militarized gendarmeries. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. I feel like that might be like how they say it in France or something. The really confusing bit about Italian police work is the involvement of public prosecutors in the investigative work. Yeah, when it was investigating judge, I assume that was just a title or something, or a mistranslation of a title. You would expect that these officials take care of public prosecution during a criminal trial representing the state against an alleged offender, hence the reference to investigating judges. And yet, Italian prosecutors may be seen acting almost as detectives in many cases. Why is that? I don't know, but it's cool. It's like...
He's appointing himself judge, jury, and executioner.
Judge, jury, executioner, policeman, lawyer, judge. Well, during my training with Gabonieri, I had to study Article 57 of the Penal Procedural Code, according to which all Italian police forces have to fulfill two main functions: public security and judiciary police. Public security involves patrolling the streets, riot control, emergency interventions, conducting roundups, which sounds awfully dystopian, and maintaining the peace in general. Whereas roundups, what is a roundup? It's some bad sorts down in the town square. Round them up, boys! Get them in the stocks! Whereas judiciary police involves acquiring reports of a crime, investigating it, collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses and suspects, down to pursuing and arresting the alleged culprit. Now, according to Article 109 of the Constitution, officials within the judiciary system exert direct control over the activities of judiciary police. This means that a judiciary official, such as a public prosecutor, can direct the investigative work of police officers. But Article 109 can also be interpreted as giving power to the prosecutors to directly conduct certain aspects of the investigation. In fact, the Procedural Code states that public prosecutors may personally conduct the preliminary inquiry phase, during which they will review evidence to ascertain if a crime has indeed taken place. Okay. So if I'm reading this right, we do have something slightly similar in the UK, which is the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. And what they'll do, I think, it's been a while, but the police would go to the CPS before they go to court. They'll be like, hey, CPS, we want to prosecute this person. And the CPS will either be like, yes or no. Do they recommend it or don't they? And I think you can pursue like private prosecution and stuff. So the CPS just make a recommendation. But I think with the police, it's almost always taken. So they'll be like, no, you just don't have enough evidence. Like, as much as you think it's this guy, you're not going to get a conviction. So just don't do it, or just go find some more evidence or something. I think that's how it works. Please don't take that as gospel. But it seems something similar is happening in Italy. The code gives the prosecutors the ability to conduct searches, interviews, and even to detain a suspect, which is something the CPS definitely doesn't do. Interestingly, the very same prosecutors will also lead the prosecution team in court. Now, is that too much power to the same individual? I don't think so, actually. The next line here from Arnaldo is probably yes, and obviously Arnaldo is Italian, so he knows more about this than I do. But the police and the prosecutor in a separate system are going to be very much on the same side. This just seems like the prosecutor, through some magically having extra time on his hands, is very involved with the police work, which means that he's very familiar with it. So it seems quite, I don't want to say efficient, because the prosecutor's time is probably quite valuable, right? Not that the police's time isn't, but, you know, I feel like they're busy dudes. They got a lot to prosecute. Probably yes, but there is good reason. Such powers derive from a constitution drafted when Italy returned to democracy after 20 years of fascist dictatorship. The idea was to build a strong, independent judiciary to prevent police forces from abusing power. Very clever, but what happens when the judiciary decides to abuse power? Critics of the Italian judiciary system may raise other questions. Could those prosecutors be railroaded during the preliminary inquiry phase and carry their own prejudices into the courtroom? Well, yes, definitely. But aren't prejudices going to exist anyway? Alas, this is within the realm of possibility, allegedly. Are those individuals as skilled in investigative techniques as a professional police officer? Well, some prosecutors used to serve in the police forces, so they may have the right amount of experience, but this doesn't apply to all of them. But I'll stop waffling, and I'll hand the keys back to Emma and an excellent retelling of Mostro's story. All right. An unusual origin story. P.S. During my research, I learned it's customary in Italy for a woman to keep her maiden name after marriage. What, really? In fact, what do the kids call themselves? In fact, as of 1975, it has been legally impossible for them to adopt their husband's last name. As such, the wives in this episode don't have the same surnames as their husbands. I had no idea, Italy. Wow. I know it's increasingly common these days. My wife took my surname. Which it feels very old-fashioned, but I'm pleased. When I do research for these scripts, I always try to get a feel for the story by listening to various podcasts on the case, and all of them always start with the murders of Giovanni Foggi and Carmela de Nozzi. But while I was listening to the book The Monster of Florence by author Douglas Preston and an Italian journalist named Mario Spezzi, I realized that even though the investigation into the murders started there, the story doesn't. Instead, it begins more than 20 years earlier, when a young Sardinian woman named Barbara Loki started an affair. In 1960, Barbara was married to a man named Stefano Mele, but she had a habit of taking other men to her bed. According to Douglas Preston and Mario Spezzi, quote, Barbara Loki was slinky and slow-eyed. What does slinky and slow-eyed feels? I feel like I know Slinky. I think this is like a slim woman. I remember learning this from like a previous episode. It's like, I think a compliment that people would use back in the day. Slow-eyed just makes her sound a bit dumb. But I assume it's a compliment. With a flattened nose and thick, well-shaped lips, she favoured skin-tight red skirts that showed off a full-bodied figure. When she was a teenager, so maybe slinky doesn't mean slim. When she was a teenager back in Sardinia, her deeply impoverished family had arranged for her to marry Stefano, who came from marginally better circumstances. He was much older than she, and on top of it, uno stupidio. He was a simpleton. Oh. Okay. When the Mele family decided to leave Sardinia and move to Florence, Stefano and his wife went with them. Stefano and Barbara would go on to share a house with Stefano's family, but the Meles did not like Barbara or her sluttish ways. That's a quote, I'll not say. Oh, Barbara, your sluttish ways, Barbara. She often stole money from her in-laws and went out on the town seeking men, giving them money, and sneaking them back to the Mele home. Stefano was completely unable to control her. In an effort to put an end to her nocturnal adventures, the patriarch of the Mele family, Stefano's father, put iron bars on the first-floor windows and tried to keep her locked in the house. Well, one, Stefano's father, that's psycho. And two, also, Barbara... It's your husband's family's house and they all know what you're up to. What are you doing? And you're stealing money from them, Barbara. You and your sluttish ways, Barbara. Then Stefano invited a fellow Sardinian to move in with him and his wife. And according to court records, their new tenant, a man named Salvador Vinci, was practically shoved into a relationship with Barbara. Okay. What is going on? Stefano's like, cuck me, baby. According to Salvatore, Stefano wasn't jealous. He was the one who invited me to live in their house when I was looking for a place to live. So I moved into Mele's house, and right away he brought me to meet his wife in bed. Oh, then he urged me to take her to the movies. He said that it didn't matter him, or he would go play cards at his social club and leave me alone with her in the house. What was her attraction? Well, when she made love, she certainly wasn't a statue. She knew what kind of game it was, and she knew how to play it. I feel like this would sound so much better in Italian accent. She knew what kind of game it was and how to play this game. Referring to sex. The threesome continued to live happily together for at least the next year. In that time, Stefano was involved in a car accident and ended up in the hospital. And while he was away, Barbara fell pregnant and would later give birth to a son, whom she named Natalino in 1962. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, anyone with the ability to count to 9 knew that Natalino was not Stefano's son, but Stefano just shrugged and told his family that Natalino was his son and that he fully intended to raise him as such. Stefano. Cock! Eventually, Stefano's father declared that Stefano and Barbara's shameful affair with Salvatore was ruining the Mele family's honor, so he kicked Stefano, Barbara, her lover Salvatore, and their son out of the house, and the four of them moved into a small rundown house in the suburbs of Florence. Big question for Stefano's father here. How the f*** did it take you so long? You put bars on the door before you were like, how about you just move out, Barbara, and your sluttish ways? There, Salvador introduced Barbara to his younger brother. Francesco Vinci. Salvatore and Francesco reportedly resembled each other a lot. I mean, they were brothers after all. But where Salvatore was said to be laid back and an introvert, Francesco was, quote, extroverted and cocky, the man of action with macho swagger. Back in Sardinia, Francesco was known as a balente, which is a Robin Hood kind of cultural outlaw. This gained him a lot of respect back home, and when he and Salvatore had first moved to Florence, Salvatore had gotten a job as a bricklayer, and Francesco started hanging out with other known criminals from Sardinia who could respect his credentials. Credentials as a Robin Hood cultural outlaw, okay. Barbara was very impressed with the whole tall, dark, and handsome bad boy thing. Of course she was. Barbara seems impressed by anything with a cock. In her sluttish ways. The Francesco had going on, and in June 1968, she dumped Salvatore and started having an affair with Francesco instead. Again, her husband, Stefano, didn't seem to mind what's happening in your lives. But it wasn't long before Barbara realized that there was a reason why a bad boy is usually known to be a bad boy. Quote, with Francesco, Barbara acted the part of gangster's mole, aka the Bonnie to his Clyde, going to the Sardinian bar, joking with the tough guys, wiggling her hips. She dressed like a femme fatale. Once she went too far, at least for Francisco's taste, and he seized her by the hair, dragged her into the street, and ripped off the offending dress, leaving her in the middle of a gaping crowd only in her slip and hosiery. Wait, so it's like, this is way too... Get naked! Then in August 1968, just 2 months after she had started hanging out with Francesco, Barbara started another affair with a married man named Antonio Lo Bianco. It's speculated that when she'd first been introduced to him, Antonio had immediately clocked Barbara to be an easy lay, and that it told Francisco that sleeping with Barbara wasn't exactly an accomplishment, and that, quote, I'll f*** her in a week. Charming. Sounds like some made-for-TV mafia drama, doesn't it? Well, this is the point in the story where we remind you that this is, in fact, an episode of The Casual Criminalist. Oh no, I'm going to stop having fun, aren't I? The story goes that Barbara had spurned both the Vinci brothers, stolen an amount of 600,000 lire from her husband, Stefano, and then flaunted her relationship with Antonio in their faces. On the 21st of August 1968, Barbara and Antonio went to the movies, and Barbara had decided to take her 6-year-old son, Natalino, with them. When the movie ended, Natalino was asleep in the back seat, and Barbara and Antonio drove to their favorite hookup spot. The son's in the back seat, guys. Barbara, stop!
Stop it. Get some help.
Which was located on a deserted road near an old cemetery. Antonio parked the car, and then Barbara straddled his lap. Things were getting hot and heavy when someone reached through the open left window and fired a total of 7 shots. Oh my lord. Natalino woke up and watched as his mother and her lover were murdered. Then Stefano stepped up to the side of the car, took the gun from the shooter, and fired another shot into Barbara's body. Stefano opened the rear passenger door and told Natalino to get out, and carried the terrified boy away from the scene and sang a song with him, while a group of men searched through the car looking for the stolen money. Oh, it's some mafia shit. Stefano put Natalino down in front of a stranger's front door, rang the doorbell, and left. When the door opens, Natalino reportedly told the shocked residents of the house that, quote, Mama and Uncle are dead in the car. The police were called, and by the time they managed to track down the car, the group of men had disappeared. Since Natalino was their only witness, he was taken to the police station, and according to journalist Mario Spezzi, the police were pretty harsh in their questioning. Bruh, he's 6. Chill. Apparently, one of the detectives had threatened the frightened 6-year-old and told him, quote, if you don't tell the truth, I'll take you back to your dead mother. Hell, dude. Detective, did you just want to give that kid trauma with, like, one sentence? Were you like, that kid? What a piece of shit. Natalino told them that his dad was there, and that he'd watched as Stefano shot his mother. He also told the police that he'd seen Salvatore, but he wasn't sure if it was Salvatore or Francesco, since the two of them looked alike. Then he told the police that his father had told him to tell the police that it had been Francesco. He'd also seen a shadow and a man who resembled his uncle Piero, and explained that he, quote, parted his hair on the right side and worked at night. Tell me about your uncle. Well, he works at night, and he parts his hair to the right, by the way, just FYI. The police managed to track Stefano Mele down, and initially he claimed that he'd been homesick that night and hadn't been involved, but the police performed some tests on his hands which came back positive for gunpowder residue, proving that he'd recently fired a weapon. When Stefano was confronted with this information, he reportedly confessed to shooting Barbara. Bro, where's your lawyer at? But then, where's your judge lawyer at? But then he told police that Salvador had been the one responsible for murdering her. Quote, "One day he told me that he had a pistol. It was him. He was the jealous lover of my wife. It was him who, after she left him, threatened to kill her. He said it more than once. One day when I asked him to give me back some money, do you know what he said? I'll kill your wife for you. That's what he said. And that'll even up the debt." He really said that. Good Lord, that was a very hard paragraph to read. I get the feeling that's taken directly from a transcript, right? Because reading someone else's spoken words when they're not very eloquent is quite tricky. According to journalist Mario Spezzi, Stefano Mele later retracted his statement and claimed that he alone had been responsible for murdering Barbara and her lover Antonio. All right, falling on the sword then. When the police asked him what he'd done with the murder weapon, a .22 caliber Beretta, Stefano claimed that he'd tossed it into a ditch, but the police weren't able to locate it. 22? I'm sure it's an effective gun for getting a little bit of murder done at close range, but it's a small weapon. According to Mario Spezzi, the police suspected that Stefano was covering for Salvatore Vinci. After all, Stefano didn't come across as smart enough to have planned Barbara and Antonio's murder, and what's more, he didn't own a car, couldn't drive, and according to the police, wouldn't have been able to make his way to the cemetery on his own. So, someone else had to have been involved, and it didn't take the police long to convince Stefano to tell them that Salvatore Vinci had been involved. The police then decided to bring Salvatore in for questioning. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "Those present have said they will never forget that meeting." Salvatore entered the room. Suddenly, the Balente himself, full of swaggering self-assurance. He stopped and subjected Mele to a hard, wordless stare. Bursting into tears, Mele threw himself on the ground at Salvatore's feet, groveling and sobbing. "Forgive me, please forgive me," he cried. Vinci turned around and left. Never having spoken a word, he possessed an inexplicable hold over Stefano Mele, and the ability to enforce a code of silence so powerful that Mele would risk life in prison rather than challenge it. I don't know why that's an inexplicable hold. He sounds like a terrifying mafia dude who will just, dip your feet in concrete or whatever if you cross him. I feel that's why he's afraid. I don't think it's inexplicable, Mario. Once again, Stefano Mele changed his story, and he told the police that he had murdered Barbara and Antonio. The police then decided to charge him and him alone, but at his trial, witnesses came forward who explained that a man matching Francesco Vinci's description had been following Barbara and Antonio that night. While they'd been watching their movie, the man approached a cashier at the cinema and asked her if the couple were still inside. When they left, he did as well. The defense argued that this was proof that it had in fact been Francesco, not Stefano, who'd been involved in planning and executing the plot to have Barbara and her lover killed. Yet the court ruled that it wasn't enough to prove Stefano's innocence, and Stefano Mele was sentenced to 14 years in prison. The murder weapon was never recovered. The murder of Pasquale Gentilcore and Stefania Pettini. At around 8:30 p.m., on the 14th of September 1974, 19-year-old Pasquale Gentilcore and his younger sister Maria got into his father's blue Fiat 127 and drove to the Borgo San Lorenzo, a town that is located 20 kilometers northeast of Florence. Pasquale dropped Maria off at a local nightclub called the Teen Club and promised to pick her up again at midnight. According to Maria, "When my brother left the club, he didn't tell me that he was going to pick up his girlfriend Stefania, but I guessed it because every time he drops me off at the dance hall, which has been happening recently, he goes to pick her up. My brother and Stefania have known each other for about 2 years, and we're engaged." Pasquale and the 18-year-old Stefania Pettini drove to their favorite spot along the Sieve River called La Fontaine. Let me guess, that means the fountain. They parked the car on a secluded dirt road, turned on the car's radio, and then proceeded to do the steering wheel tango. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "On any given weekend night, the hills surrounding Florence were filled with young couples parked in shadowy lanes and dirt turnouts in olive groves and farmers' fields. In Italy, most young people live at home with their parents until they marry, and most marry late. As a result, having sex in parked cars is a national pastime. It has been said that 1 out of every 3 Florentines alive today was conceived in a car." Oh, I like it. Anyway, Pasquale and Stefania's parking lot shuffle took longer than expected. That's not what Stefania said. And when midnight came around, Maria was left standing outside the teen club on her own. A friend helped her look for Pasquale and ended up giving her a lift home at around 2 a.m. Maria then spent the next hour walking the streets to see if she could find her brother. What are you doing? before returning home, and informing her parents that Pascal was missing. He's just having a good time. He's having a good time with his girlfriend, Stefania. They're making new Florentinos. Florentines? Florentines! Meanwhile, Stefania's mother, Bruna Benini, was also growing concerned over the fact that Stefania hadn't returned home yet. At around 3 a.m., she woke up one of their neighbors, a man named Fosco Bartolesi, and asked him to help them look for Stefania. Be close friends and just like, hello. What? What do you want, neighbor? It's 3 a.m. It's like my son hasn't come home. Well, he's probably, how old is he? He's 18. Have you checked the parking lot? Both families spent the night out on the streets looking for the missing teenagers. And when 6 o'clock came around, Stefania's parents drove to Pascal's parents' home, where they were informed that he was also missing. The two families then made a few calls to their other friends and family members, and when they still hadn't managed to track the couple down by 7 a.m., Pascal's father, Vincenzo Gentilcore, and Stefania's father, Andrea Bettini, went to the local police station to report their children as missing. And that's when they were informed, oh no, that the bodies of a young man and a woman had just been found near La Fontaine, and that they might have to return to the police station later that day to identify them. Hell, that took... I don't know why I didn't expect that to be coming, but I was like, oh, this is quite lighthearted, and then, it's casual criminals, of course they're getting murdered, aren't they? At around 7:30 that morning, a farmer had been on his way to do some maintenance work in his vineyard when he came across a blue Fiat 127 that was parked next to the road with the radio still on. Someone seemed to be asleep inside the car, and there seemed to be a white statue lying in the grass next to it. It wasn't until the farmer... Oh no, that's not a statue, is it? No. It was a bloodied, naked body of a young woman. The farmer then ran to his closest neighbor's house and eventually managed to let the police know what it found. When the police arrived on the scene, they noted that the car's radio was still on, which suggested that they might not have heard their attacker approach the car. The driver's window was shattered, and Pascal was still sitting in the driver's seat. He'd only been dressed in his socks and underwear. His attacker had shot him 5 times through the driver's side window, and the bullets entered his left arm, his chest, his lower back, his groin, and his lower stomach. The attacker then stabbed him several times in the chest with a knife. This feels personal, doesn't it? That feels real personal. Stefania had also been shot, presumably when she'd been sitting in Pascal's lap. She had bullet wounds on her side, in her right leg, and in her knee. Her body had then been dragged out of the car to the side of the road, where the attacker stabbed her 97 times in the upper chest, her stomach, and her pubic region. I would say that sounds personal, but that now just sounds like a psycho. That's like... I find it like, okay, you've got like psycho, just straight up pop. Then you've got personal, let's say stabbing someone 20 times. And then you kind of drift towards psycho again when it's like 100 times, right? That's my vibe, at least. He then shoved a vine shoot. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, so, that's grim. You can imagine Their clothes lay scattered on the ground and included Stefania's bloodied underwear, suggesting that she'd been wearing it when they'd been attacked. The police found 33,800 lire in Pascal's trouser pocket, and after the bodies had been removed, the car and the clothing were all taken into evidence. A day later, someone called the police to let them know that they'd found Stefania's handbag. It contained her personal effects, her diary, and some letters, but nothing else. According to the website Monster of Florence... Firenze is Florence. I didn't know that, but otherwise I would have been able to guess. The police hadn't realized that Pascal and Stefania had been shot until after the autopsies had been done. Wow, okay, so they returned to the scene of the murder. That's when they found 5 Winchester long rifle 22 caliber H-series shell casings lying in the grass. A ballistics report would later explain that the killer had most likely used a Beretta automatic 70 series pistol and a one-sided cutting knife to commit the murders. What's more, the Beretta's firing pin was faulty and made a distinctive notch on the rim of the shell casing whenever a bullet was fired. Okay, so I've actually got a little picture of this. 1974 shells delivered to Colonel Bzutini, October 12th. Okay, so yeah, you can see clearly it's a pretty distinctive marking. It's not like, the striations or whatever, that's a distinct mark. From what I understand, it's like the killer was leaving fingerprints behind at every crime scene. During their investigation into the murders, the police tried their best to locate anyone who might have wanted to hurt either Pascal or Stefania. They learned that Pascal had worked as a bartender in Florence and Stefania worked as an invoicing clerk. No one at their workplaces had reported any odd occurrences in the weeks leading up to their deaths, but when the newspaper started reporting on the murders, a man contacted the police and explained that he had been Stefania's driving instructor. The instructor told the police that the day before the murders took place, he and Stefania had been out driving when he noticed that a car seemed to be following them. The car eventually drove into a different direction, and the instructor had initially just shrugged it off. But in the light of what had happened, maybe the police would want to look into it. The police ended up taking a closer look at the instructor instead. Yes, I mean, you would, of course, but eventually decided that he had nothing to do with the murders. Remember how he said that the police hadn't realized that Pascal and Stefania had been shot until after their autopsies were finalized? Wasn't he shot like 7 times or something? Well, initially, they thought the attacker had used a screwdriver to stab the couple, which would supposedly explain the round holes in their bodies. Yeah, I mean, not unreasonable. Like I said, the 22 is not a particularly powerful round. But this also meant that for the first few days after the murders, the media reported how Pascal and Stefania's killer had torn their bodies apart with a screwdriver. The day after the murders, a man named Giuseppe Francini went to see the detectives working the case and declared that he had important information to share. According to the police reports, quote, he ramblingly recounted his sex life before beginning his statement, then stated that he had no screwdrivers in his car and that he had an alibi. What are you doing, dude? What's going on with you? Hello? Yes, I'd like to talk about that crime. I've had sex with women. There's no screwdriver in my car. I am not a murderer. Okie dokie. Francini spontaneously declared before the recording began, in the presence of both the defendant and judicial officers, that he suffered from frequent nervous disorders with hospitalizations. He said he'd never had a girlfriend, that he had only had full intercourse with women on a few occasions, that his last intercourse had been a few weeks ago with a prostitute in Florence, but without ejaculating. Why are you telling me this? I don't need to know this. Why? Just like the police be like, yes, and... Despite claiming that he had important information to share, Giuseppe's ramblings won him a spot on the suspect list, and of course they did. Well, they'll just be like, that dude's crazy. He's cray-cray. Get him out of here. Keep an eye on him, though. Like a hawk. The police also learned that the day before the murders, Pascal had visited a faith healer named Bruno Macali, who provided him with a remedy for a liver ailment he had. But while they were gathering more information about Bruno, they learned that Bruno was a voyeur. In other words, he got off on watching other people have sex. What's more, he and his friends liked to spend their evenings camped out next to the popular lovers' lanes, like the one at La Fontaine, to watch young couples get it on. It's a little bit odd. It's like you and your mates. What, this like the voyeurs club? What the going on with people in this episode? According to the book Monster of Florence, quote, locally these voyeurs were known as Indiani or Indians because they crept around in the dark. Because Indians are famous for creeping around in the dark? What is happening? Some carried sophisticated electronic equipment, including parabolic and suction cup microphones, tape recorders, and night vision cameras. You guys are weird. You're weird, dude. The Indiani had divided the hills into zones of operation, each managed by a group or tribe who controlled the best posts for vicarious sex watching. Some posts were highly sought after, either because they allowed for very close observation, or because they were where the good cars were most commonly found. All right. You guys are really weird. Anyway, the police ended up getting a search warrant for Bruno's house, but again, they didn't find anything that they could link to the murders. Then, on the 17th of September, the police received a letter from a man named Gino Clusini. Gino explained that he often spent some quality time at popular lovers' lanes with his girlfriend, and that on one occasion he'd spotted 2 men who acted suspiciously. Oh, okay, so Gino's not a weirdo. He's just having sex in his car. And he's like, what's up with all the people with these parabolic cameras? It's a bit weird, isn't it? Quote, well, in each of these locations, I'd always noticed a car with an individual inside who, having hidden his car, was busy approaching parked cars with couples inside. He also annoyed me, so much so that I once rebuked him and received serious and violent threats in response. Being no longer young and impulsive, I avoided the reaction of the brute who, after leaving, returned to the spot with another person. Both had large stones in their hands and other things I could not see as I was walking away. Weird. Gino explained that on one occasion, he'd seen the suspicious men walking around near the car that he and his girlfriend were in, and then decided to confront the man. When he did, he noticed that the man carried a stick in one hand and what looked like a screwdriver in the other. Then the man ran away. Gino followed him to where a white Fiat 127 was parked between the trees and watched the car drive away. The individual in the car appeared to be about 40 to 45 years old, with dark skin and hair, a southern accent, about 5'3" to 5'7" tall. 5'3"? Wait. Oh, no. It's not that small. For some reason I was like, that's 4'3", which would be really tiny. But no, I'm 5'11", so it's not. He's a little bit short, but that's about it. He's not a little person. And of sturdy build, he looked like a farmhand or a labourer or something similar. The other man appears to be around 35 or 40 years old, approximately 165. I'm guessing that's a typo because he's probably not 165 meters tall. That would be quite notable. I guess he's 165 centimeters tall, with fairly robust build, brown skin, I would say very dark, with black hair and a regular cut, combed back, and a non-Florentine accent. In my opinion, more southern or Sardinian. Quote, "For family reasons I cannot reveal anymore, but I hope that the above may be of some use, if only to keep an eye on the area, which is full of dangerous voyeurs/maniacs who prey on young people who do not expect to find themselves face to face with crazy criminals who will stop at nothing." No, but don't you get like a vibe from something like The Lover's Lane and stuff? And it's like, oh, there's the guys with the microphones and the cameras and the screwdrivers and the... Wouldn't you just be like, how about we don't go to the Lover's Lane? How about we just go to any other street that's not very busy? Boom! Gino was able to provide the police with the white Fiat's license plate, and they identified the car's owner as a man named Guido Giovannini, which is the most Italian name I've ever heard. The police managed to get a search warrant for his house that very same day, but they didn't find anything that connected him to the murders. When they questioned Guido, he explained that he, his son, and a friend of his named Danielle Olivi had spent the evening in question at Danielle's parents' house. His wife, his 11-year-old son, and Danielle Olivi confirmed it, and his wife went on to explain that Guido had been back home and in bed by 11:20 p.m. That's a pretty solid alibi. I mean, I know they're all relatives, but there's a lot of them. Despite the fact that he had an alibi, 2 more witnesses had told police that they'd seen Guido slinking around in the dark while they were getting hot and heavy in a parking lot, and that they had taken note of his license plate. It's dark. It could just be someone has taken his car or borrowed his car or something. I'd just look to see who can drive his car, who has been driving his car recently. The police then arrested him on the 18th of September 1974 and confiscated a number of knives and a Diana air rifle that they'd found in his home. Air rifle, so not a .22. According to an article which appeared in the newspaper La Nazione, let me guess, The National. When questioned by the magistrates, he was charged with carrying an improvised weapon, a billhook, possession of a firearm without the required license, a rifle, and making threats, reportedly against some young couples. During questioning, Guido reluctantly told the investigators that he was indeed a voyeur, and even related a story that matched one of the witness statements made against him. But he insisted that he hadn't murdered Pascal and Stefania and told the police that, quote, "You better be careful. I have an alibi for Saturday night. Call my friend who lives across from my house." Yeah, this is completely fair. Often there's the case of people admitting to smaller crimes to throw the police off their scent, which absolutely doesn't work. But I think in this case, yeah, he's a bit of a weird, he's a voyeur or whatever. He's a bit weird. Is that kink shaming? It feels weird. No. I don't think that's that. It's weird to watch people having sex if they don't know about it. That's just weird. I don't think that's controversial. Right? I don't know. We live in a weird world these days. People will be like, Simon, that's kink shaming. I'll be like, no, it's not. Please stop. He was also reportedly more than happy to name and shame several police officers he knew who were also Indiani. Is this way more popular than I think or something? But 2 weeks later, on the 1st of October 1974, it was reported that he'd been released from police custody, most likely because the police had been unable to find any evidence that he'd been involved in the murders. According to the article, which appeared in La Nazione, the defense attorney for the arrested man had requested provisional release, a request that was granted yesterday by the investigating magistrate. And so, just over a month after the murders had occurred, the police ran out of leads, and the case grew cold. The murder of Carmela Denuncio and Giovanni Foggi. On the evening of the 6th of June, 1981. Okay, so we'd taken a step forward in time. The last one was in the 70s. I think the one before that was the 60s. This is the 80s. 30-year-old Giovanni Foggi was having dinner with his brand new fiancée, the 21-year-old Carmela Denuncio, and her family in Scandicci, a suburb of Florence. At around 10 p.m., Carmela and Giovanni informed her parents that they were going out for some ice cream, and her parents reportedly informed Giovanni that he had to have the daughter back home by 11:30 p.m. She's 21, guys. I guess she does live at home, so it's kind of like my house, my rules or whatever, but she's 21, he's 30. Be like, yes, Dad. Giovanni agreed, and the two of them got into Giovanni's little Fiat Ritmo. We don't know whether they actually went to get some ice cream, but we do know that they ended up parking next to an olive grove on the outskirts of town. While John Lennon's Imagine played in the background, the two then proceeded to test the car's suspension. Ay! According to a farmer who lived across the road, he'd heard the song start up just before 11 p.m, and the song abruptly stopped in the middle and didn't start up again. Considering the fact that the song Imagine is the first track on the album of the same name, we can assume that barely 2 minutes had passed by that point. When Giovanni and Carmela didn't return to the Denunzio's home, her worried parents called the Foggies and asked if Giovanni and Carmela had gone to their house. When Giovanni's parents informed them that they hadn't seen either Carmela or Giovanni that night, the two families went out searching for them. At 10:15 the next morning, their fathers arrived at the nearest police station and reported Giovanni and Carmela as missing. Meanwhile, a policeman named Vittorio Sifone was out for a walk with his 4-year-old son when he noticed the solitary car parked in the middle of nowhere. It looked like the car's... Wait, so this guy and his fiancée or whatever were living in the same house together, right? Oh, wait, it doesn't say. Okay, so maybe not. Sorry, for some reason I thought they were living in the same house, but they're not. They're just fiancés, and they don't live together. Meanwhile, a policeman named Vittorio Sifone went out for a walk with his 4-year-old son when he noticed the solitary car parked in the middle of nowhere. It looked like the car's occupant was still asleep, but when the policeman took a closer look, he noticed that the man was partially undressed and that had been shot through the temple. A woman's purse lay on the grass outside the car, and its contents had been tossed onto the ground. Realizing that they just stumbled onto a murder, Vittorio took his son and drove to the nearest payphone to call the police. He then left his son with a friend while he headed back out to the scene of the crime to wait for the police. When the forensic team arrived, they noted that Giovanni had been shot 3 times, twice in the head, once in the chest. He'd also been stabbed twice, once in the neck and once in the chest, but by that point, he'd already been dead. The driver's side window had been shattered from the impact, so it's assumed that the killer shot at Giovanni and Carmela through the window and then attacked. The police would later find 4 Winchester long rifle 22 series H-caliber shell casings lying in the grass, as well as 3 more lying inside the car. If they've got that mark on them that we saw before, same dude, right? They found Carmela's body 12 meters away from the car. She was lying on her back and was still partially dressed in her clothes. Carmela had been shot 5 times, and the fatal shot was one to her chest, which penetrated her heart. Her body was dragged out of the car and deeper into the field, where the killer cut off her jeans and underwear. The killer then cut out... Oh my god. What the... He cuts a bit of her body off in a sensitive place that... Jesus. According to the website Monster of Florence, quote, essentially, the skin and hair had been excised with a semicircular cut, starting at 10 o'clock and moving clockwise back to the starting point. The incision was clean and precise. The precision was such that it allowed the skin tissue to be separated down to the underlying fat layer without affecting the underlying muscle structures. The cut slightly damaged the left labia majora. Oh my god. It continues... According to the autopsy report, quote, it cannot be assumed that he held the lamp in his hand while performing the excision, because such a skillfully performed operation cannot be carried out with only the hand holding the instrument, but requires at least both hands of the person responsible. Summarizing the environmental factors, very poor lighting, the need for additional light source, limited space and time to act, the danger of people or vehicles approaching, they're saying he has a lookout, right? Someone holding the torch for him. And an unstable and uncomfortable position, it was obviously necessary to act as quickly as possible and with minimal noise. Based on the examination of the cadaveric findings and careful analysis of the photographs, the experts believe they must expressly emphasize the perhaps decisive importance of the exceptional skill with which the pubic region of the girl's body was exposed. Wait, so are they saying that he had someone standing there with a thing, or are they saying like he's a surgeon? When the police started their investigation, they looked into all the obvious suspects, ex-lovers, family members, business associates, etc. Initially, the police thought that Carmela had been the intended target of the attack, but 2 days after the murders, La Nazione published 3 articles that shook the investigation to its core. The headlines read, 2 lovers shot and stabbed to death in the countryside near Florence, a sleepless night for 2 anguished families, but Carmela and Giovanni never returned. Striking series of analogies with the crime of Borgo S. Lorenzo. End end quote. The third article had been written by a journalist named Antonio Villarreal, and in his byline he explained that, quote, 7 years ago, in a similar case, 2 lovers were murdered at night while they were in their car. The killer attacked ferociously. Various hypotheses are being examined by investigators. The article goes on to explain that, quoting again, this is somewhat similar to what happened 7 years ago on a Sunday in a field about 2 kilometers from Borgo San Lorenzo. Another crime that has many similarities was yesterday morning's. At dawn on September the 15th, 1974, 2 lovers, Pascal Gentilcore and Molin del Piano and Stefani Bettini from Vizio, were horribly murdered. He was found in the driver's seat, the girl not far away. After killing them, the murderer or murderers attacked the girl with 100 blows from a screwdriver. The Carabinieri and the police followed all possible leads, even arresting some people, but then it turned out that they had nothing to do with that ugly story. And so the years passed without anything concrete being found. According to Mario Spezzi, the journalists had done the police a huge favor by linking the 2 murders. The police, having read the article, had done a comparison between the shells recovered from the 1974 killings and the current ones. Let's see. The police lab report was definitive. The same pistol had been used in both crimes. Boom. It was a .22 caliber Beretta long rifle handgun, a model designed for target shooting, no silencer. The crucial detail was this: the firing pin had a small defect that left an unmistakable mark on the rim of the cartridge, as unique as a fingerprint. When La Nazione broke the news, it caused a sensation. It meant that a serial killer was stalking the Florentine hills. But even though Mario Spezzi seems to believe that at the time the police also suspected they were dealing with a serial killer, the case files doesn't seem to support that assumption. Okay. Instead, the investigation initially focused on Carmela's ex-boyfriend. I mean, yeah, but the mutilation and stuff, that's some like serial killer psycho territory. That's not spurned ex-boyfriend territory. But then an anonymous call was made to the police to let them know that between 11 and 11:30 on the night of the murders, a red Ford Taurus that belonged to a well-known Indiani named Enzo Spalletti had been seen heading towards the spot where Carmela and Giovanni had been murdered that night. According to the website Monster of Florence, quote, Spalletti was a well-equipped voyeur, roaming the countryside, armed with a flashlight and a pocket recorder, which he used to record couples' sexual intercourse, taking note of their license plates and their habits. He was caught and threatened several times by those he was spying on. No because it's weird. The police brought Spalletti in for questioning on the 12th of June 1981 and took him to the police station, and he told the police on the evening of the 6th of June he had indeed been in the area, but that he hadn't been alone. He claimed that he'd driven to Florence and picked up a lady of the night and then driven her to a well-known lover's lane on the outskirts of the city. Once they'd finished, he drove his female companion back to Florence and then returned home to his wife and 3 children. He went on to claim that he was back in bed by 11 p.m. Spalletti told the police that when he woke up on Sunday morning after the murders, he went to hang out with his friends at a local bar. What is your life? You got 3 kids? Sunday morning. What shall I do? Well, I went out voyeuring at a lady of the night last night. Might as well go to a bar and drink with my mates. Bye, kids! Fucking piece of shit. He read about the murders in a local newspaper. He then went to visit some friends, and they discussed the murders. The police didn't believe his story, though, and they confronted him with the fact that they had a witness who claimed that he'd been out stalking couples that night. What's more, there aren't any newspapers printed on Sunday, so the only way that Spalletti could have known about the murders was if he'd been there that night and had either murdered Carmela and Giovanni or had seen what had happened. Dude, that is such a bungle. Spalletti eventually caved and admitted that he had been there that night and told the police that, quote, and so what? I wasn't the only one out that evening spying on couples in the area. There were a whole bunch of us. There was a car parked in a field about 300 meters from the restaurant, specifically a red Fiat 128 with a young couple inside. I should point out that I arrived there at around 10:30 p.m. and stood about 50 meters away from the car. It's a bad habit of mine, and I'm sorry to admit it. I stayed there from 10:30 p.m. until midnight and returned home at 12:30 or 12:40 a.m. This is mad suspicious, bro. You completely changed your story in its entirety. While I was there, at around 10:40 p.m., a certain Fosco Fabri from Scandici arrived, who has the same vice as me and stayed with me. When I left at midnight, I said goodbye to Fosco and saw him walking to his car, but I didn't see him drive away because when I left, he was still there. You asked me if I heard any noises, screams, or gunshots, but I didn't hear anything. Moreover, I was 3 kilometers away when the incident took place, and there is a nightclub nearby, so you can hear music and noise. End quote. Fosco Fabri would confirm Spalletti's story and told the police that they'd all met up at a restaurant earlier that evening before they headed out into the hills. However, he also told the police that between midnight and 2 a.m. that night, Spalletti had been unaccounted for, and that the day after the murders, he had told Fabri and some others that he'd seen the bodies the night before. It also suggested that they should go up into the hills at night to see if they could catch the killer themselves. When the police asked him about it, Spalletti told them, quote, "I've had the blank firing pistol for 7 to 8 years, and I bought it to keep at home for defense." A blank firing pistol? What use is that going to? I guess it's a bit scary. But it's not going to do any, ultra close range, it could do some damage. I put it in my car last night. Since I was very shocked by the murder, last night I took the gun with the intention of going to the area, hoping to find the murderer. After all, they say that murderers always return to the scene of the crime. I told my wife that if we voyeurs don't do something, the murderer will never be found. Your wife knows that you're just up to this weird-ass hobby? What is going on in this episode? Who are these people? What's your lives? The police obtained a search warrant for Spalletti's house and spoke to his wife, Carla Agnoletti. She told the police that on the night of the 6th of June, Spalletti left the house between 9:30 and 10 p.m., something he did every weekend night. He would tell her that he's just going for a drive, but she knew that he was one of the Indiani. Quoting her, "I usually go to bed at around 1 a.m. when my husband gets home. Sometimes I'm already in bed asleep, so I can't say exactly what time he got home. Also, on Saturday the 6th of this month, I went to bed at around 1 a.m. on the 7th, and my husband hadn't gotten home yet. I can't tell you what time my husband got home because I was already asleep." The next morning, Carla got up early and got the children ready for Mass, and Spalletti went out to meet up with some of his friends. He returned for lunch at around 12:30, and, quote, "My husband told me that in the evening near Scandicci on an old road," he even specified the location, which I don't remember at the moment, "he'd seen an engaged couple killed. He told me that the boy had been shot in the car while the girl had been killed and carried a few meters away. The following Monday, the 8th of this month, when my husband returned from work, he brought me the newspaper La Nazione, which contained the article about the double homicide in Scandicci. I should point out that on Sunday afternoon, when my husband told me about the double homicide in Scandicci, he told me he would bring me the newspapers on Monday morning, as the incident would be reported by all the news outlets." End quote. When the police searched Spalletti's home and car, they did not find any evidence that could tie him to the murders of Carmela Denunzio or Giovanni Foggi, but the police didn't care. They had a suspect, and on the 15th of June 1981, they arrested a protesting Enzo Spalletti and charged him with perjury and 2 counts of murder. Wait, how did he perjure himself? He hasn't been to court yet. Wait, perjury is not when you lie to a cop, is it? No, you can lie to a cop, you just can't lie when you're under oath. I mean, you can, but then you're doing perjury. But that October, 2 more people were killed with the very same Beretta pistol that had been used to murder Carmela and Giovanni, proving La Nazione's theory that a serial killer was stalking the hills surrounding Florence, and Enzo Spalletti was acquitted of all charges. Good idea. Yeah. A terrible idea from the person who's actually doing the crimes. You'd be like, wait, they arrested that Enzo dude? I'm just going to shut the f*** up and not do any more crimes until that guy's in prison, and then change my MO. The murder of Susanne Cambi and Stefano Baldry. On the evening of the 22nd of October, 1981, 24-year-old, not much time has passed. Oh wait, is this the 2 people in October? It is, isn't it? Wow, okay, that's an escalation. 24-year-old Susanna Cambi and her fiancé, 26-year-old Stefano Baldi, were having dinner with his mother at her home in Calenzano, a suburb of Florence. It was Thursday evening, but a nationwide strike had been announced for that Friday, which meant that they wouldn't have to go to work the next day. So at around 10:30 that evening, Susanna and Stefano announced that they were heading into the city to go and watch a movie. By this point in the episode, it should come as no surprise that Susanna and Stefano didn't actually plan on going to watch a movie that night. Instead, Stefano drove his black Volkswagen Golf to a well-known lovers' lane in the area, and the 2 of them engaged in some roadside romance. At 9:50 a.m. the next morning, Stefano's family went to report them as missing, but just over an hour later, the search for Susanna and Stefano was called to a halt when 2 farmers contacted the Carabinieri and informed them that they'd come across the bodies of 2 young people. Again, the car had initially seemed to be abandoned, but when the 2 farmers drove up to it, they noticed the half-naked body of a young man lying in a ditch a few meters in front of the car. The front driver's side window had been shattered, and the 2 farmers had found the body of a young woman off to the side. Again, the couple seemed to have been interrupted in the middle of their nighttime activities. Stefano's pants had been pushed down to his ankles, and he'd still been wearing his shirt when the attacker shot him. At some point during the attack, his body had been dragged out of the car, and his attacker then proceeded to add 4 stab wounds to match the 4 bullet holes in his chest. Susanna, on the other hand, had been shot 6 times. Her attacker then dragged her body to a ditch off the side of the car, where he propped her up and stabbed her twice. She was still fully clothed, but her t-shirt and bra had been shoved upwards, presumably by Stefano, and her underwear had been shoved down her legs at one point. But after she'd died, her attacker had torn her skirt and shoved her legs apart. He then went on to remove her mons pubis, but this time seemed to have been in more of a hurry, since he didn't do a very neat job of it. This is definitely the same dude, right? I mean, zero question. During the autopsy, the pathologist noted that Susanna was clutching a lock of brown hair in her fist, and Stefano had 2 long brown hairs stuck to a partially torn nail, although given the lack of defensive wounds, it's possible that the hair didn't belong to their attacker, but rather the 2 lovers themselves. Well, does one of them have the hair that matches? Once again, the couple's belongings had to be scattered all over the place, but their money had been left in their wallets. The police also found several boot prints in the mud surrounding the car that might have belonged to their attacker, a rock that had been covered in red paint, as well as 7 Winchester brand .22 caliber long rifle shell casings with the letter H stamped onto the base. The next morning, the newspapers started reporting on how yet another engaged couple had been murdered, and linked the murders of Susanna Cambi and Stefano Boldri to the murders of Carmela Giovanni, Pascal, and Stefania. The media took to calling the new serial killer the Surgeon of Death, and claimed that the killer had used a scalpel to remove the vaginas of his female victims, and the public jumped to the conclusion that this meant the killer was a doctor. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "It would not be an exaggeration to use the word hysteria to describe the public's reaction to this fresh double homicide. The police and Carabinieri were swamped with letters, anonymous and signed, which had to be followed up. Doctors, surgeons, gynecologists, and even priests were among those accused, along with fathers, sons-in-laws, lovers, and rivals." Up to this time, Italians had considered serial killers a northern European phenomenon, something that happened in England, Germany, or Scandinavia, and of course in America, where everything violent seemed to be magnified tenfold. But never in Italy. Young people were terrified. The countryside at night was utterly deserted. Instead, certain dark streets in the city, especially around the Basilica of San Miniato il Monte above Florence, were packed with cars bumper to bumper, the windows plastered with newspapers or towels with young lovers inside. See, that's what you should have done. Don't go to the lover's lane, just go to some dark streets and be like, all right, hopefully no one comes, but we'll put on some paper. How romantic. In the weeks following the murders, Susanna and Stefano's families and the police made several appeals to the public to come forward with any information they had, and the newspapers came up with story after story about the killings. Some suggested that the police still suspected that the killer was one of the Indiani, and others suggested that the killer would stalk his female victims for days before he murdered them. They also pointed out that someone had to know who was responsible for committing these murders, and speculated that they had to be part of the Indiani community. According to an article by La Nazione titled 600 Pistols Under Expert Scrutiny to Discover the Monsters, the police were seizing hundreds of thousands of shell casings that had been spent at shooting ranges all over the city to see if any of them had the distinctive notch that the shell casings at the crime scene had. And yet, they didn't find any that matched the ones at the crime scene. 8 days into the investigation, the police didn't have any leads, so Judge Vincenzo Tricomi put out a call to all police stations throughout Italy and to Interpol to ask if any of them had ever encountered a similar series of murders. One of the investigating judges working the case, Salvatore Palazzo, also requested that a psychological profile for the killer be drawn up. Dr. Carlo Nocentini, a psychologist and psychotherapist, was appointed to draw up the analysis, and in his profile he explained that, quoting, "There is probably a traumatic event in the subject's life that has acted as the basis for the paranoid picture. Women are killed and disfigured in a fit of rage that tends to symbolize the maternal figure. So, the hypothetical traumatic event is linked to behavior experienced as highly frustrating by the subject, such as actual or emotional abandonment, or he witnessed episodes in which the mother's behavior destroyed the image that the subject had preconceived of her." All right, it's quite specific and psycho-babbly, I guess, a little bit. No, a little bit. Feels like a little bit of a guess. But then October came to an end, and then November and December, and by June 1982, the residents of Florence had started to relax. Young couples left the relative safety of the city streets and returned to frolicking in the hills surrounding Florence. And on the 2nd of June 1982, La Nazione published an article titled, "With the monster still lurking, the couples have returned to the woods." They warned these couples that the police still hadn't managed to capture the person responsible that the media had dubbed the Monster of Florence. A little over 2 weeks later, he struck again. He is absolutely ramping this shit up. It was like 60s, 70s, 80s, 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 80s. The murder of Antonella Migliorini and Paolo Mainardi. On the evening of the 19th of June 1982, 19-year-old Antonella Migliorini and her boyfriend, 22-year-old Paolo Mainardi, had dinner at Paolo's mother's house. Afterwards, they met up with some friends at the Piazza di Popolo in Montespertoli, which is located about 30 kilometers southwest of Florence. The young couple got in Paolo's blue Fiat 147 and left Montespertoli at around 10:30 p.m. They drove towards State Road 80, looking for a relatively secluded spot where they could engage in some park and play. They ended up parking on the shoulder of an access road near another well-known lover's lane and then started to get busy with it. According to the website Monster of Florence, they'd specifically chosen the spot because Antonella was afraid that they'd encounter the monster if they were too isolated. We know that their chosen spot left them more than a little exposed because at around 11:40 p.m., a man named Francesco Coletti and two of his friends drove past the little blue Fiat and noted that the car's windows were a little fogged up and that the courtesy light was on. According to Francesco, the car was, quote, parked on the right, perpendicular to the road, just off to the side. The rear was closest to the road, with the front facing the countryside. I clearly noticed the interior lights on, behind the somewhat fogged windows. I saw no human figures either inside or out, nor did I see any other vehicles. We were proceeding in second or third gear at a speed of about 40 kilometers an hour, and in any case not exceeding 50. Imagine the speed limit of 50 is like, I definitely wasn't speeding. It's like, dude, not so worried about that right now. We didn't pass any vehicles before the junction for Poppiano. In fact, shortly after that junction, about 100 meters if I remember correctly, we passed a car that we all later recognized as Stefano Calamandri's burgundy red Fiat 128. It is kind of funny, everyone in Italy seems to be driving a Fiat. About 5 minutes later, Stefano Calamandre and his friend, Adriano Pagarelli, drove past the little blue Fiat with a courtesy light, but the courtesy light was off, and the car had been moved to the other side of the road. They would later tell the police that the car's rear wheels were stuck in a ditch alongside the road, and it looked like the car had been abandoned. They kept on driving, but would return a few minutes later, thinking that someone in the car might need help. A couple named Graziano Marini and Concetta Bartolesi had been parked nearby, busy fogging up their own car windows. Oh my god, it seems like most people in Italy are just having sex in cars. And that's when they heard several gunshots. They quickly got dressed and drove a distance away, but after a few minutes, they approached the little blue Fiat to see if they could help, around the same time that Adriano and Stefano returned. I feel that I would go to, find someone with a phone. Go find a payphone or something first, no, right? Don't go investigating the murder yourself. First call the police. Because even if someone has been shot, what are you going to do for them? They need an ambulance. This was around the same time that Adriano and Stefano returned. The four of them approached the little blue Fiat and found that its occupants were still inside and bloodied but breathing. Paolo was sitting in the driver's seat and Antonella was lying in the back. Graziano and Concetta told the two men that they heard gunshots, but then they noticed the bullet holes in the windshield. Adriano and Stefano left the scene to go to the nearest police station, good, while Graziano and Concetta made their way to the nearest payphone to call for an ambulance. Why not just call the police from the ambulance? At the same time as you're calling the ambulance. When the ambulance arrived, Antonella had sadly passed, and Paolo was unconscious. He was put in the back of the ambulance and taken to Empoli Hospital. He never regained consciousness and passed away at 8 a.m. the next morning. Oh no. I was like, so these guys are going to be able to identify them. Yes, but no, and that's why we have so many pages left. When the Carabinieri arrived on the scene shortly after midnight, they found the car leaning over into the ditch with its front facing the road. Its right door had been partially torn off and stood wide open. How do you tore a car door off? What is this guy, the Hulk? The left door's window had been shattered. Based on the scene reconstruction, the Carabinieri were able to deduce that the couple had been parked on the opposite side of the road when they'd been attacked. Paolo had then managed to get into the driver's seat and attempted to drive off, but the car got stuck in the ditch. That's when the monster resumed his attack. Antonella had been shot twice in the head. One bullet entered the left side of her forehead and passed underneath the skin to the right side of her forehead without causing any fatal injury. The second gunshot was a fatal one to her forehead and had most likely been made after Paolo attempted to drive off. Paolo, on the other hand, had two gunshot wounds that had been shot from behind. One in his left shoulder and another had entered just under the left side of his jaw and then exited through his left cheekbone. None of these were fatal. It's safe to assume that he'd climbed into the driver's seat and attempted to drive off. When the car got stuck, the monster shot him twice, in the left temple, causing the bullet to become lodged in his upper jaw, and again to the left side of his head. The bullet entered his left ear and ended up being fatal. Because we know that Adriano and Stefano drove past not long after, we can assume that the killer had realized that the car was too exposed, so he had abandoned the couple and run off unable to finish his ritual. The forensics team found 8 Winchester brand 22 caliber long rifle shell casings scattered across the road, following the route the car would have taken when Paolo tried to drive away. Look at the casings, it's going to have the stamp, isn't it? It's a serial killer, we all know it. Based on the shot-out headlights and the shattered glass lying underneath the front of the car, the monster had been shooting at the car while it was moving and managed to hit one of the headlights. The other had been shattered with a blunt object. They also found a box of Nausetam, I don't know what that is, in the grass outside the car. According to sdrugs.com, Nausetam is used to treat memory disturbances, dizziness, decreased concentration, emotional lability, dementia due to cerebrovascular events, brain injury, Alzheimer's disease, comatose state of vascular, traumatic or toxic origin, chronic alcoholism, learning disorders in children not related to inadequate training or the peculiarities of family environment as a part of combination therapy. Jesus Christ, what is this, some sort of magical drug that treats everything? Yes, it treats decreased concentration, alcoholism, Alzheimer's. Boom! The box had been prepared by a pharmacist called Albert on the 28th of July 1980, but it didn't specify who the patient was. Still, the Carabinieri would go on to try and locate the doctor who prescribed the medication. The next morning, Deputy Public Prosecutor Silvia Della Monica reportedly contacted the press to ask them to help the Public Prosecutor's Office to set a trap for the Monster of Florence. She wanted them to spread the word that Paolo had regained consciousness shortly before his death and had been able to provide the police with information about the killer. Unfortunately for her plan was doomed to fail, since the newspapers had already received calls from the hospital staff at Empoli Hospital to let them know that the monster had attacked another couple, and several of them had already written stories on the case and sent them off to be published. Oh no, newspapers! I'm all for freedom of the press, but in this case it would have been really good if you had been made to shut up just for a little while. For the greater good, you know. On the 21st of June, La Nazione published several articles about the case, and one of them was titled, "She was dead, he was dying. He passed away without being able to speak." Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Well, the next day, a newspaper called Pace Sarah published an article titled, "Before dying, he managed to give a face to the monster," which explained that Paolo had in fact regained consciousness. This feels like such a planted thing now, though. It feels like so obvious. Is it obvious, or is it just obvious to me because we know? You know. Still, Lorenzo Allegrantni, the man who'd driven the ambulance that night, would later tell the Carabinieri that it received several suspicious and threatening phone calls from an unknown caller. He claims that he had received a call 2 days after the murder, and that the person had told him, "Allegranti, if you talk, you're a dead man. I'll cause a massacre. Remember, the monster will strike again." Later that same day, he claimed to have received another call. According to Lorenzo, the man told him, "I'm from the judiciary. Since you've put on record that things are different from what the other witnesses reported, I want you to tell me exactly everything you know." Lorenzo replied, "If that's what you want, call me to the prosecutor's office or the Carabinieri. I won't tell you anything over the phone." End quote. Now, Lorenzo would later report that he had received similar calls over the course of the next 2 years, but they weren't investigated by the police. Anyway, Deputy Public Prosecutors Adolfo Izzo and Silvia Della Monica then reportedly ordered the Carabinieri to compile a list of everyone who had 22 long rifle caliber Beretta 70 series pistols registered to their name. They also reportedly issued a sketch of the monster based on vague witness reports that they had received in the weeks following each murder. All of them described the person they'd seen as being between 1.6 and 1.7 meters tall, between the ages of 35 and 40. And with receding dark hair, which doesn't sound like it was very much to go on. No, just like a below average person. Below average height, average person. Again, the police received numerous phone calls and tip-offs from disgruntled wives or friends or neighbors who were reporting that their husband, brother, friend, or doctor had to be the monster. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "Dozens of people found themselves the object of scrutiny and suspicion. The day the portrait published, a menacing crowd formed in front of a butcher shop near Porta Romana of Florence, many clutching newspapers with the portrait. When a new person joined the crowd, he would go into the butcher shop to see for himself, then join the crowd milling in front. The butcher shop had to close for a week. The poor butcher's probably like, sake, it's not me. I just am very generic looking. On that same day, a pizza maker in the Red Pony Pizzeria also became the target of suspicion because he bore an uncanny resemblance to the identikit. A group of boys began making fun of him by coming into the pizzeria with the portrait, putting on a show of comparing it to him, and then rushing out as if in terror. The next day, after lunch, the man offed himself. What the f***? Oh my god. Jesus. But this is where the twist in the story occurred. On the 7th of July 1982, Brigadier Vincenzo Peretti opened up a new case file, and in the notes, he wrote that he'd received a call from an anonymous but trusted source who claimed that he knew who the monster was. This source, who was originally from Sardinia, told Peretti that the monster's name was Salvatore Vinci, and that back in August 1968, Salvatore, his brother Francesco, and a few others had shot and killed a woman named Barbara Loki and her lover, Antonio Lubianco. The source then went on to explain that Barbara Loki's child had been in the car when the shooting had taken place, and that Barbara's husband, Stefano Melli, had taken the fall. The pistol they'd used during the murders had been a Beretta, and it had gone missing. According to a note posted by the owners of the website Monster of Florence, quote, the investigating judge at the time, having been notified, ordered the recovery of the case file. Around July 20th, 1982, it was on his desk. Attached to the case file were, by fortuitous and inexplicable coincidence, the cartridge cases and bullets found after the double homicide. Do they have the stamp on them? According to Mario Spezzi, the Carabinieri ended up locating the shells that had been discovered at the scene of Barbara Loki's murder, and wouldn't you know it, they were a perfect match for the ones found at each of the monster's recent killings. It's the same guy, we know it now, right? Why is the speculation about this? And remember that box of Norzatam that had been found at the scene of Antonella and Barbara's murder? Well, the police had managed to find the doctor who'd prescribed it. His name was Dr. Enzo Bagnoli, and later on, it would be discovered that two familiar names had popped up on the list of his recent patients, Enzo Spalletti and Francisco Vinci. According to an article which was then published in La Nazione on the 12th of July 1982, quote, the results of the investigators have led to a new hypothesis. Perhaps the monster did not act alone. So he's working with his, mate or whatever. It's pretty up. The Sardinian Trial. On the 27th of July 1982, investigating Judge Vincenzo Tricomi and Lieutenant Colonel Olinto del Amico went to interview Stefano Melli at his home in Ronco al Adige. In the transcript of their meeting, Stefano is noted as saying that I acknowledge that I am being questioned at this point as a witness only because, following my conviction, it has emerged that the gun used to kill my wife and Antonio Lobianco was used to commit 4 other double murders, which I certainly could not have committed as I was in prison in 1974, in Ronco al Adige in 1981 and 1982. Stefano went on to, so if you've got 2 guys though, they can rotate in and out. Stefano went on to recount his original version of what had happened that night, that he'd been sick in bed when Barbara and Antonio had been murdered. He then told the police that he always believed that Francisco Vinci had committed the murders, not Francesco's older brother, Salvatore Vinci, as he'd originally claimed. Quote, on August the 22nd, 1968, after being interrogated and spending the whole day in the barracks, I was released and returned home with the child. That same evening, before falling asleep, he told me that it was Francesco Vinci who killed his mother and carried him in his arms, and who had threatened to kill him if he spoke. Stefano then went on to explain that the Beretta that had been used to murder Barbara and Antonio had belonged to Francesco, and that he used to keep it in the trunk of his car. On the 27th of July 1982, the police obtained a search warrant from Francesco Vinci's house, but couldn't find him there. The police also found out that he owned a car repair shop and that he closed up shop not long before the police came knocking at his front door. They did, however, find his wife at home, and she had no problem telling them all about her abusive ass of a husband who loved to flaunt his affairs in her face. They also found his car in his repair shop, but didn't find any sign of the Beretta in the trunk. This guy, you're going down, mate, come on. Judge Adolfo Izzo and Deputy Public Prosecutor Silvia Della Monica ended up opening a new investigation into the murders of Barbara Loki and Antonio Lobianco, which they now suspected had actually been a sort of clan execution. And their new suspects included the Vinci brothers, the Mele family, Barbara Loki's brothers, and several of Barbara's ex-lovers, of which there were many. This investigation would come to be known as the Sardinian Trail, and it was based on the idea that the Vinci brothers and the other accused were all somehow involved in the Monster of Florence murders. The Sardinian Trial can be a whole separate script on its own, but maybe a very boring one since it just includes a bunch of people being arrested, acquitted, and arrested again, with some public outrage and political maneuvering sprinkled in for a bit of spice. The second investigation into Barbara and Antonio's murder is also heavily intertwined with the investigation into the Monster of Florence, and I found it really difficult to differentiate between what was relevant to the script and what wasn't. If I had a cent for every word I wrote thinking that it might be relevant to this episode, I'd be about $90 richer. Excellent. Basically, the Vinci brothers, the Melee brothers, and their other co-accused would all be charged with the murders of all the victims of the Monster of Florence, but they were eventually acquitted in 1989 and let go. Anyway, since Francesco was still a suspect in the murder of Florence case, on the 6th of August 1982, an arrest warrant was issued for Francesco Vinci on the basis of domestic abuse. The police got a tip that he was hiding at a friend's house near Firenzuola, which is located about an hour's drive south of Florence. He was arrested on the 15th of August 1982. Once they had him in an interrogation room, they tried to establish if he had an alibi for one of the murders that had been committed by the Monster of Florence, and even though Francesco had a cover story for every night in question, the police weren't able to verify any of them, and they didn't have any evidence that he had committed the murders. The only link they had between Francesco and the murders was the fact that his wife told the police that he used a prescription drug called Norzetam. Still, the police somehow managed to keep him in prison until the 21st of January 1984, when he was acquitted of all charges, because the Monster of Florence had struck again, yes, but if there's more than one of them, right? The murders of Wilhelm Meyer and Uwe Rusch. On the evening of the 9th of September 1983, a German couple named Wilhelm and Uwe decided to park their light blue Volkswagen transporter van just off the road next to a vineyard in Geluzzo, a suburb located in the southern parts of Florence, and evidently planned on spending the night there. The next morning, another German citizen named Rolf Reinecker was on his way to work the next morning when he spotted the van and noticed that it had German plates. He'd initially planned on stopping to talk to the inhabitants of the van, but another car honked at him since he was slowing down traffic and he kept on driving. Bit weird. Is that just something people normally do? It's like, oh, it's Italy, it's next to Germany. I mean, almost. Wait, does Germany touch Italy? Oof, that's some terrible geography there. I don't think so, right? France, Austria, Switzerland touching Italy? Slovenia on the right-hand side. On the east. It doesn't matter. But would you really be like, oh look, this car's got the same license plates as me. Hello, guten Tag. When he returned home that afternoon, he noticed that the van hadn't moved, and this time he pulled over. When he approached the van, he noticed that there was a bullet hole in one of the windows, and then he saw the bodies. He rushed home and called the Carabinieri to report his findings. When the two officers from the Carabinieri arrived on the scene, they noticed a .22 caliber Winchester brand shell on the ground and realized that the two occupants of the van were victims of the Monster of Florence. So they called the headquarters in Florence to report the murders. When the forensics team arrived on the scene, they noted that the van's side door had been unlocked and that the attackers had fired 5 shots at the occupants through the side windows of the van. Wait, did Emma just say attackers? Plural? Okay, but one of them is in prison, so this could be a larger group. I was assuming 2, but maybe it's more. Based on the forensic reconstructions that were later carried out at the Institute of Forensic Medicine, there had been 2 shooters, well there we go, and based on the entry holes on the van, they were between 1.6 and 1.74 meters tall. It also meant that when the attack took place, the shooters would have struggled to actually see who they'd been shooting at. The forensics team found 2 shell casings inside the van. One of the shell casings that the investigators found at the scene was shinier than the rest. Okay. My source material specified that it was copper-plated, while the rest were all just made out of lead. But after going on a research tangent and asking an army veteran I know, I've been reassured that the shells wouldn't have been made out of either copper or lead, but cartridge brass, which is a mixture of copper and zinc. Yeah, lead's way too soft for this stuff, right? The army veteran and I concluded that the person who wrote the original police report had only a very basic understanding of ballistics. What is interesting is the following note that was made in the forensic report, quote, "Of the shell casings found, one is copper-plated, like those used in 74. All the others are bare lead, like the 2 1981 murders and the 82 murder." The forensics team also found several gay porn magazines. There's a typo here that says gay corn. On the floor outside the van, and the majority of them had been torn up or shredded with a very sharp knife. Inside the van, they found various items that belonged to the two men. Oh, they're both dudes. I did not pick up on that until now. They found various items that belonged to the two men, including a camera and a large amount of cash. Inside the van, the two men had made a kind of bed on the left-hand side of the van, and they'd fallen asleep with their feet touching and their heads pointing away from each other. Uwe's body was found lying on its back in the rear left corner. He'd been struck 3 times while he was asleep, once in the mouth, once in the face, and once in the left forearm. Wilhelm had been asleep on the front end of their makeshift bed and had been partially covered with sleeping bags. He'd been shot in the head, his chest, and his left buttock. Neither of the men had been stabbed, and it's been speculated that whoever had murdered Wilhelm and Uwe hadn't known that they were two men, and upon discovering it, had torn up the gay porn magazines in anger. Again, it says gay corn. Why would I assume that at this point it's autocorrection from the word processor, but corn? The police's main suspect, Francesco, was still in prison, so they kicked off their investigation by speaking to the next person on their list of suspects, Salvatore Vinci, but he had an alibi for the night of the murders. Next up was Giovanni, or John Vinci, Salvatore and Francesco's younger brother. According to later court records, he'd also been one of Barbara Loki's lovers. Never. Barbara? No. Then the police interrogated a man called Carmelo Catrona, who, you guessed it, had also been one of Barbara Loki's lovers. No. Barbara? Never. Yet the police weren't able to locate any pieces of evidence that might have linked them to Wilhelm and Uwe's murders. But now that there was evidence they were dealing with more than one killer, they had to rethink their entire investigation. So, on the 18th of September 1983, public prosecutor Pierre Luigi Vigna declared that they were essentially starting the investigation from scratch because, quote, the key to discovering the monster lies in the first crime. Okay then. The testimony of Iolanda Libra. On the 22nd of January 1984, a young woman named Iolanda Libra went to the Carabinieri officers in Scandicci and declared that she thought her ex-lover, Giovanni Mele, was the Monster of Florence. There's a name we've heard before. She told the police that Giovanni Mele had a fascination with the idea of having sex in his car and that it often drive her to well-known lovers' lanes. But instead of stopping and acting on his fantasy, they'd keep on driving, as if he were looking for something or someone. She also mentioned that he kept porn magazines, a knife, and ropes his... again, corn magazines. Maybe this is Emma protecting me, or thinking that porn magazines might get us demonetized, but I think that's fine. Beginning to think it's probably not autocorrect anymore. But there's these corn magazines. A knife and ropes in his car, and that he would show her different positions that were described in his porn magazines. Iolanda told the police that Giovanni... What is up with your life? Iolanda told the police that Giovanni Mele had an outrageous-sized penis, but that, quote, the disproportionate member, according to Libra's experience, would have been of little use to him in intimate relationships. He's so... okay. Oh, yeah, okay. By which I'm assuming she meant he was really bad at sex. It's not the tool, it's how you use it! More significantly, he mentions arguments between him and his brother-in-law, Pietro Mussolini, with whom he lives, which resulted in mutual accusations of insanity. The police obtained search warrants for the homes of Giovanni Mele, his sister Maria Mele, and Piero Mucciarini, who was Stefano Mele's brother-in-law. They didn't find anything at Mucciarini's home, but they did find some interesting things at Giovanni Mele's home. There's a picture of a scalpel. They found various cutting and carving tools. They also found some kind of wallet in which he kept 2 scalpels and a hacksaw with a sharpened blade, as well as various maps and notebooks. In one of the books, there was a note which read, December 1st, full moon, favourable day, and a list of various license plate numbers. That is suspicious. Full moon because it's bright outside. And the license plate numbers of the people he's been tracking to kill them. Allegedly, in my opinion, probably is going to be what we find out in a second. In the trunk of his car, they found the large knife, corn magazines, ropes, and some scented liquid hand soaps. They also found some human hairs and what looked like bloodstains in the trunk, as well as another knife hidden in the cubbyhole of his car. Inside the house, they found another collection of blades and saws, as well as a Gillette scalpel. Which was a kind of utility knife / safety razor with a removable blade. I have to say, I don't want to sound like a complete psycho, but that's a really good looking, Gillette. To me, Gillettes are those cheap plastic, 5 razors in one or whatever that, you have. I guess they're not really cheap. But this looks like a really premium knife. Dude, stop. Giovanni was taken in for questioning, and when he was asked about his collection of blades, Giovanni told the police that he used them to work cork, and forensic examinations of the blades would confirm his story. He also explained the purpose behind the maps and the note about December 1st and the full moon being a favourable time, as that was when it was best to go hunting for mushrooms in the countryside. Okay. According to the website Monster of Florence, regarding the hair, the tests revealed that they're perhaps from Mele himself. Regarding the bloodstains, they will not produce the typical reactions of blood findings. Wow. This dude, it's just... Is this really a series of unfortunate events? So Giovanni Mele wasn't the Monster of Florence, and the police had once again reached a dead end. Still, Giovanni Mele and his brother-in-law, Piero Mucciarini, were both arrested on charges related to the murders of Barbara Lozzi and Antonio Labianco, and would spend the next several months in prison. The murders of Pia Rontini and Claudio Stefanazzi. On the evening of the 29th of July 1984, 18-year-old Pia Rontini left her home at around 9:05 p.m. and walked to her boyfriend's house. She and her boyfriend, 22-year-old Claudio Stefanici, then got into his light blue, of course it's a Fiat, Panda 30 at around 9:15, and they told Claudio's mother that they were just going for a drive and would be back by 10. Going for a drive, are we? Instead, they drove to a secluded spot amongst some trees approximately 5 minutes' drive away and started to get a little bit busy in the backseat. At around 9:45 p.m., two different people heard gunshots coming from the direction of an empty field. They would both later inform police that the shots were fired in two separate bursts. 3 shots, then 2. At around 11 p.m., Claudio's mother was starting to get worried, so she called Pia's mother to ask if she'd seen the kids. When Pia's mother informed her that she hadn't seen them either, the two women arranged a search party, and for the next few hours they scoured the city looking for their missing children. One of Claudio's friends, a young man named Pietro Beccarini, knew where Claudio and Pia liked to spend some time alone. He offered to go and see if he could find them, and when he approached the area, he saw Claudio's Panda parked some distance from the road. Pietro told the police that it honked several times to try and draw Claudio and Pia's attention, but when they didn't respond to him, he returned to the city to fetch some help. Around 3:45 a.m., Pietro and his friends called the Carabinieri officers in Borgo San Lorenzo and told the officers that their friends, Claudio and his girlfriend Pia, had been murdered. Another person called the Carabinieri officers at Pontassieve at around 4 a.m., and both stations sent officers to the scene. The forensics team later noted that the car had been parked down a dirty road that was approximately 60 meters away from the main road that led back to Visio. They found 4 Winchester long rifle 22 caliber H-series shell casings on the ground next to the car and another one inside the car. The car's front seats had been pushed forward, and Claudio's body was found in the back of the car, curled onto his side. He'd only been dressed in his underwear, t-shirt, and socks. He'd been shot 3 times, twice in the upper chest and once in the back of the head. The police found Claudio's pants underneath the car seats, and there was a bullet hole in one of his pockets. The bullet had struck his wallet and was still there. They also found a corresponding hematoma, aka bleeding under the skin on his buttock, suggesting that he'd still been wearing his pants when he'd been killed, and that the monster had removed them post-mortem. Claudio had also been stabbed 10 times with a single-edged knife, and based on 2 of the entry wounds, he'd still been alive for part of the attack. Pia had been shot twice, once in the head, and then in her left arm. She'd also been stabbed at least twice before her killer dragged her out of the car and then 8 meters down the hill into some bushes. The monster then cut away her clothes before he removed her mons pubis and her left breast because, of course, he had to go a step further. Yeah, psychos like this, they escalate. In the autopsy report, it's noted that, quote, the gunshot to the cranioencephalic structures certainly caused an immediate profound loss of consciousness and voluntary movement, which unfortunately proved irreversible. It's a very interesting way to describe death. Therefore, the girl was not only unable to make any defensive movements, but was also unable to move even minimally, making it absolutely impossible to perform coordinated and purposeful actions. And this comment was most likely made to counter the rumors doing the rounds in the newspapers that Pia had initially tried to run away from the monster. Again, the police didn't have any leads to go on, so they once again turned to their only pool of suspects, Francesco Vinci, Giovanni Mele, and Piero Mucciarini. They'd all been in prison at the time, so, well, they were out. This meant that they were left with Salvatore Vinci as their only viable suspect. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "They put his house under observation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. His telephone was tapped. When he left his front door, he was often followed." The public prosecutor's office then announced the creation of an anti-monster squad that would be tasked with hunting down the monster. They reported... Guys, haven't enough people died already? Shouldn't we have done that a little bit earlier? It's like, oh, fine, we'll take it seriously. Jesus Christ. They reportedly spoke to hundreds of men whose families, wives, girlfriends, or neighbors had told them that they were definitely the monster and interviewed... If your wife, if your friends, your family or whatever, girlfriend is like, this guy's the monster, he's a psycho, that says you're a piece of shit, really, doesn't it? Even if you're not the actual monster. And interviewed dozens of voyeurs who claimed they'd seen the Monster of Florence in action, but in the months following Claudio and Pia's murders, no new leads were discovered and no credible suspects were identified. All they could do was wait for the monster to strike again and hope that this time he would make a mistake. The murders of Nadine Morio and Jean-Michel Craviechvili. According to the website Monster of Florence again, quote, "This crime is one of the most controversial, not only in terms of the route taken to reach Scopetti, but also in terms of the actual day of the murder and the manner in which it was carried out." So, we'll approach this one a little bit backwards then. 36-year-old Nadine Morio and 25-year-old Jean-Michel Craviechvili were camping out in the woods near the Florence American Cemetery, south of Florence. They'd parked Nadine's white Volkswagen Golf just off the access road and set up their tent a few feet in front of it. It's speculated that they'd been camped out there for at least 2 nights before they were murdered. On one afternoon, the 9th of September 1985, which was a Monday, a teenager named Luca Santucci left his home to go and look for mushrooms in the woods. He parked his car next to a white Volkswagen Golf, and as he got out of the car, he reportedly noticed a child's car seat in the back of the other car. He'd walked some distance away when, according to Luca, he noticed, quote, "a strange odor along with a loud buzzing of flies. I thought that somewhere around there was a dead cat. Around the tent, I didn't notice anything. Then I went toward the thicket of bushes on the opposite side, and in that moment I saw them. 2 naked feet sticking out of the greenery. I didn't have the courage to go any closer." Thinking that the child had to still be alive somewhere, Luca rushed home and told his father what he'd seen. They then called the local Carabinieri station in San Casciano for help. When the Carabinieri arrived on the scene, they initially searched the area for any trace of a child, but didn't find any sign that a child had been present when Jean-Michel and Nadine had been murdered. What they did find, though, were 3 Winchester long rifle 22 caliber H-series shell casings on the ground next to the tent. They'd find another 6 the next day. The forensics team later identified 5 bullet holes in the tent, suggesting the killer had stood outside and then fired several shots at its occupants while they presumably had been in the middle of having sex. The police discovered Nadine's body inside the tent. She'd been shot in the head 4 times, all of them non-fatal, since they were shot from the side and struck her forehead and chin. She was also hit in the chest. Again, it's noted as being non-fatal. She was then left to bleed out while the monster dealt with Jean-Michel. Christ, she got shot 5 times. 4 times in the head and is just... Ugh. Jean-Michel's body lay 13 meters away from the tent in a ditch surrounded by between 15 and 20-liter plastic paint cans. The monster had used the lids to partially cover Jean-Michel's body. He had been mostly unharmed by the bullets that had killed Nadine, but one had passed through his mouth, chipped a tooth, and punctured his lip. 2 had passed through his left hand, and he had another gunshot wound to his right elbow. He had 9 stab wounds in his back, chest, and neck, as well as defensive wounds to his left arm, and this led investigators to speculate that he'd attempted to flee, but the killer had managed to chase him down and tackle him to the ground, something that was considered to be quite a feat since Jean-Michel had been an athlete who used to run 400-meter sprints back home. I mean, yes, but he's been shot twice in the hand and once in the mouth, once in the elbow. Yeah, I mean, it's not the legs, but it's still going to slow you down, isn't it? You've been shot. After he'd murdered Jean-Michel, the monster returned to the tent and dragged Nadine's body out onto the ground outside the tent. He stabbed her once in the left side of her neck, but according to the autopsy report, she'd already been dead when that happened. The monster removed her mons pubis as well as her left breast and put her body back in the tent. before he zipped it up. Because Nadine's body had been in the covered tent for so long, her body had been more decomposed than Jean-Michel's by the time their bodies were discovered, and the 3 forensic pathologists working the case disagreed about when the murder had taken place. Their closest estimation was that the murders had occurred either late Saturday night or early Sunday morning. They were still busy conducting the autopsies when a peculiar package arrived at the offices of the public prosecutor in Florence. On top of the package was a note written in cut-out letters from a magazine, which is always a bad sign. It was addressed to Deputy Public Prosecutor Silvia Della Monica, who had been involved in the case for some time. Inside the package, the police found Nadine's missing breast. That is so f***ed up. The forensic team managed to find some partial fingerprints on the package, and the police were able to trace its origins to a postbox on the Via Provinciale in Florence. But that's all they were able to determine. In the days directly following, the fingerprints seemed pretty bloody useful, though, no? Not been a lot of mention of fingerprints so far. In the days directly following the murders, the police interrogated every person who was even remotely associated with the Sardinian trial and performed countless searches of their homes. They also followed up on all their alibis for that entire weekend, since the pathologist couldn't agree on a time of death, but they didn't find anything of significance. Only later would it be established that the couple had most likely been murdered on Saturday night, since they'd planned on leaving for France on Sunday morning so that Nadine could be home in time to attend her daughter's first day of school. Young Italian couples hadn't felt safe enough to engage in some backseat hanky-panky outside the safety of the city's walls for some time now, but seeing as how Nadine and Jean were the second group of tourists to be murdered by the Monster of Florence, something had to be done to keep them safe. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "Throughout the areas where people often camped, signs in multiple languages were posted, warning of the danger of remaining there between dusk and dawn. But the mention of a serial killer was carefully avoided so as not to scare tourists completely away." The city of Florence printed thousands of posters designed by the famous graphic artist Mario Lavagine, who drew a staring eye surrounded by leaves. The sign read in multiple languages, "Watch out, kids. Attention, danger of violence." Using the same design, tens of thousands of postcards were also printed and passed out at toll booths, railroad stations, campsites, youth hostels, and on public buses. The anti-monster task force was growing desperate to solve the case, so undercover police agents started to frequent the lovers' lanes dressed up as amorous couples in the hope of catching the monster red-handed. According to Mario Spezzi, some lovers' lanes and cemetery trysting places had more police than lovers sitting in pairs in the cars. There were not enough women officers to go around. During hot weather, male couples took turns wearing a wig, and many moustaches were sacrificed. Police stations all over Florence were still receiving hundreds of tip-offs regarding who the monster might be, and on the 25th of September 1985, they received one which read, "Question our fellow citizen, Pietro Passiani, born in Viccio. This individual is said by many to have been in prison for having killed his own fiancée. He has 1,000 skills. A shrewd man, cunning, a farmer with big clumsy feet but a quick mind. He keeps his entire family hostage. The wife is a fool. The daughters are never allowed out. They have no friends." Okay, I mean, definitely something I guess you could look into. Probably worthwhile looking into anyway. Make sure this guy's not like actually keeping his family hostage. A masterclass in railroading. Pietro Passiani lived in a village called Mercatale, which is located about an hour's drive south of Florence. He'd been a soldier during World War II and fought on behalf of the Italian resistance. In April 1951, he'd found out that his fiancée, Miranda Bugli, was cheating on him. He caught her and her lover, Severino Benini, a traveling salesman, together one afternoon. The two of them were getting down and dirty in the back of Benini's car. Ooh, he's got a complex around this then, doesn't he? When Passiani discovered them, he reportedly pulled Benini off of Miranda, and the two fought. Passiani managed to beat Benini's head in with a rock before he stabbed him to death, and then reportedly sexually assaulted Miranda next to her lover's body to show her who owned her. That is psycho. I'm like, he murdered him. It's like, well, rage of the moment, you're finding your wife doing this, but then having sex with assaulting your wife next to the dead lover. That is psycho, dude. Once he was finished, Passiani packed up Benini's body and carried him towards a nearby river. But instead of dropping the body in the river like he'd initially planned to, he just left it in the middle of a field and returned home. Miranda reported his crimes to the police, and Passiani was arrested on the 13th of April 1951. He was found guilty of the murder of Severino Benini and spent the next 13 years in prison, where he belongs. He was released on the 4th of July, 1964, and got married to his wife, Angelina Manni on the 26th of June, 1965. The two of them would go on to have two daughters, Rosanna and Graziella, but according to the website Monster of Florence, the family was barely scraping by, and at one point, Rosanna and Graziella were living at the orphanage of San Giovanni because their parents simply could not afford to feed them. In April 1973, Passiani started working for the Marquis Rosselli del Turco's agricultural business in the town of Colognol, which is located about 100 kilometers west of Florence, as a skilled laborer, and the family's fortune started to change. Over the course of the next decade, Passiani was able to afford to buy 2 cars as well as 2 homes, which he paid for in cash. Get the feeling he's doing more than skilled labor then, unless Italy was a lot cheaper than I imagine it would be in the 70s. In September 1979, Passiani bought a house in Mercatal Val di Pesa and moved his family back from Colognol in March 1982. For the next 2 years, he worked as a farmer for the Afro Gaziero family in San Cassiano. When Nadine and Jean-Michel were murdered in 1985, Pietro was working at the Luiano winery. At the time, the police didn't think that the 60-year-old, overweight, red-faced farmer suited the profile of the Monster of Florence, especially since the few witness statements they did have claimed that the monster was between 1.65 and 1.7 meters tall, lean, and between the ages of 40 and 50. And strong and fit enough that had been able to chase Jean-Michel down and tackle him to the ground, so they put Passiani's file aside and continued to focus on the Vinci brothers instead, particularly Salvatore Vinci. Yeah, this dude does not fit the description of the monster by multiple people, right? But then the murders stopped. In January 1986, the anti-monster squad had been taken over by a new chief of police called Ruggero Perugini, and he ordered a complete overview of the Monster of Florence case. He wanted his team to forget about the Vinci brothers and their allies and the whole Sardinian trail, and to work on the assumption that the Beretta revolver they'd used to murder Barbara Loki and her lover had either been sold or lost after the 1968 murders. Essentially, they had to start from scratch. Oh wow, so he's like, these murders happened with this gun. Forget about those. Someone has picked up this gun a decade later and begun again. Clever man. Clever man, that's definitely worth pursuing, isn't it? According to Mario Spezzi, quote, "Instead of plodding once again through the evidence and rereading the thousands of pages of interrogations, Perugini was smitten with the idea of solving the crime in the modern way, with computers. He was in love with the scientific methods used by the FBI to hunt serial killers. Yeah, because they're really good. They're really good at it. I've seen Mindhunter." In 1984, the Anti-Monster Squad had been gifted with a newfangled gadget called an IBM computer. La-di-da. And they were going to use it to help them solve the murders, but no one really knew how to use it. So Perugini fired it up, programmed in all the information they had on every person who had once been accused of being the monster, and then asked the computer to cross-reference their suspect list with a list of known sex offenders. Now, these days, a comparison like that would be easy if you had all the information already loaded into various servers or networks, but this whole exercise took them a few years, since all of the information had to be put in manually first. Which is interesting, isn't it? Because once you've put all that information in, you can also use it to look up other stuff. Computers are amazing. Perugini and his team had also set up a map of the areas where the murders had occurred and tried to establish where the killer's home territory was. And in 1989, Perugini then looked at the little Venn diagram that consisted of his map, the list of possible suspects, and the list of people who'd once been accused of being the monster, and realized that one name had popped up multiple times: Pietro Passiani. According to Mario Spezzi, most of all, it was the 1951 murder that attracted Perugini's attention. It had taken place near Viccio, Passiani's birthplace, where the monster had struck twice. On the surface, it looked like a monster crime. 2 young people making love in a car in the Tassinala woods, ambushed by a killer hidden in the bushes nearby. Perugini considered it a crucial piece of evidence that Passiani, spying on the 2 lovers from the bushes, told investigators that he had gone into a frenzy of rage when he saw his girlfriend bare her left breast for her seducer. That was the moment when he had snapped. The story reminded Perugini of the left breast taken from the last 2 victims. Furthermore, if Passiani was the monster, it would explain why the murders stopped so suddenly. You see, back in May 1987, Passiani's 2 daughters had accused him of abuse and sexual assault, and he was arrested. According to his court judgment, Passiani had, quote, "sexual intercourse including oral sex with his daughters Rosanna and Graziella from a very young age on countless occasions, and then subjected them and his wife, Angelina Manni, to continuous physical and psychological abuse, beating them systematically almost every day, even to the point of drawing blood, using his hands and feet as well as sticks, pliers, and whatever else came to hand. They don't have a death penalty, do they? But this isn't death penalty right now. He was found guilty on the 12th of February 1988, and then spent the next 3 years in prison. In Perugini's mind, his incarceration explained why the Monster of Florence hadn't murdered anyone since. Of course, he had to prove this theory, so Perugini obtained a court order to search Passiani's house, and when he and other members of the Anti-Monster Squad performed a walkthrough of Passiani's modest home, Perugini channeled his inner Claude Frollo, the archdeacon from the Hunchback of Notre Dame, Simon. Okay. And saw signs of Passiani's special brand of depravity everywhere. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, prime among this was a reproduction of Botticelli's Primavera, the famous painting in the Uffizi Gallery, which depicts in part a pagan nymph with flowers spilling from her mouth. The picture reminded Perugini of the gold chain lying in the mouth of one of the monster's first victims. This clue so captivated him that it became the cover of the book that he would later publish about the case, which showed Botticelli's nymph vomiting blood instead of flowers. Reinforcing this interpretation, Perugini took note of the pornographic magazine Centerfold pinned up in Passiani's kitchen, surrounded by pictures of the Blessed Virgin and saints, showing a topless woman with a flower clamped provocatively between her teeth. It's a bit weird, isn't it? The other incriminating evidence they found also included a round from a hunting rifle, World War II shell casings, one of which was being used as a flower vase, a photograph of Passiani as a young man posing with a machine gun, 5 knives, a postcard sent from Calanzano, a register book that on its first page had a crude drawing of a road that could not be identified, and a package of porn magazines. Quoting Spezzi again, but the crown jewel of evidence found in Passiani's house was a disturbing painting. It depicted a large, uncovered cube, inside of which there was a centaur. The human half of the centaur showed a general with a skull in place of a head who brandished a saber in his right hand. The animal part was a bull whose horns became a lyre. This strange creature had both male and female sex organs and huge clown feet. This bizarre-ass painting. There were mummies that looked like policemen, one of which was making a vulgar gesture. A hissing snake was coiled in the corner wearing a hat, and in front of all of this, most significantly, were 7 little crosses planted in the ground surrounded by flowers. 7 crosses, 7 crimes of the monster. The painting was signed Passiano Pietro, and he had given it a misspelled title, A Science Fictian Dream. End quote. That's a weird painting. Perugini took this painting into evidence and sent it to an expert who would inform him that the person who had painted it had a mind that was, quote, compatible with the personality of the so-called monster. Yeah, fucking no shit. Some weird-ass painting, dude. Convinced that it found his man, Perugini then went on to do everything in his power to build a case against Pietro Passiano and completely ignored all the criminal profiles they had received and all the information they had that suggested the killer wasn't a heavy-set man of just 1.52 meters, who also just happened to love his wine a little too much, had a laundry list of medical complaints, and had to receive a heart bypass in 1985 after he suffered a pretty serious heart attack. Why do we have to give him that? I'm sure that's really expensive for the state, and he's a piece of Can't we just be like, oh no, oh no, oh no. I know we should give him a heart surgery, but Jesus Christ. Never mind the fact that when Pascal and Stefania had been murdered back in 1974, Passiani and his family had lived in Colognol, which was 100 kilometers away. According to Mario Spezzi, quote, but before he could hang the sign of monster around Passiani's neck, the chief inspector had to explain how the gun used in the 1968 clan killing ended up in Passiani's hands. He dealt with the problem in the simplest possible way. He accused Passiani of committing the 1968 murders too. Oh, okay, I thought the sold gun thing would be it. At the time, the investigations into the Sardinian trail were still underway, and now that 2 separate groups of suspects were all accused of having committed the same murders, the different police forces who were investigating the Monster of Florence case started to choose sides. Inspector Perugini was backed by 2 powerful supporters for his investigation of Passiani: Piero Luigi Vigna, prosecutor, and the police. The Carabinieri backed Mario Rotella. The struggle between Vigna and Rotella, the police, and the Carabinieri finally came to a head. Vigna led the charge. He argued that the Sardinian Trail investigation was nothing more than a sterile result of paying heed to the ravings of Stefano Mele. It was a red herring that had sidetracked the investigation for more than 5 years. Wait, was Stefano Mele the weird dude who was, talking about his sex life? The quote continues, Mario Rotella, with his condescending pontifications and lack of charisma, had become deeply unpopular with the press and the public. Vigna, on the other hand, was seen as a hero. And finally, there was Passiani himself. Brutal murderer, daughter R-wordist, wife beater, alcoholic, a man who forced his family to eat dog food, a monstrous human being in every way. To many Florentines, if he wasn't actually the monster himself, he was close enough. End quote. As a result, the investigation into the Sardinian Trail was officially closed down. All of the suspects were acquitted, and the Carabinieri withdrew from the investigation into the Monster of Florence. According to Mario Spezzi, Mario Rotella's final reports on the Sardinian Trail explained exactly what had happened to the .22 caliber Beretta after the 1968 murders, and explained who its most likely owner was. Quote, it built a persuasive case that the Sardinians who participated in the 1968 killing knew who took the gun home and therefore knew the identity of the Monster of Florence, and that person was Salvatore Vinci. Over the course of the next 2 years, Perengini did his best to build a strong case against Passiani, but you can't build a house without a strong foundation, and Perengini didn't have any evidence to back up his claims. In April 1992, he managed to convince prosecutor Vigna to allow him to search the 2 properties that Passiani owned in Marcatale, and the police literally took the 2 properties apart. They searched every single corner in the 2 buildings and dug up the yards. They even had metal detectors out there and dug up sections of the property to look for human remains. The search lasted for a total of 12 days, and Passiani, his lawyer, and his cardiologist watched on as the police did their best to find even a scrap of evidence that would prove that Passiani had somehow been involved in the murders. The first interesting thing they came across was Passiani's hoard, aka postal savings bonds, cash books, checks, and cash totaling about 123.1 million lira. That's got to be a lot of money, no? That would be worth about 126,000 euros or $147,000 today. Oh, okay. It's a lot of money, but 123 million sounds like a lot. The second interesting thing that they came across was the bullet. According to the website Monster of Florence, quote, at 5:45 p.m. on the 29th of April 1992, due to a reflection in the sun on a dull day. No way. Ruggero Perugini saw a flash coming from the hole in a reinforced concrete post used to support vines in the vineyards. The search was halted, and forensic scientists were allowed to film the post and the object's recovery operations. Inside the hole in the stake, a bullet was recovered. It was a .22 Winchester long rifle Series H bullet, unexploded, bare lead. Quite convenient, isn't it? Almost as if it had literally been planted there. How else would an unexploded bullet that supposedly exactly matched the one the monster used end up in a concrete post in a vineyard that the police just happened to be searching at this time? Oh no. Wait, this is your guy! Do we really need to plant evidence? Please no. And based on the photos, it was covered in dirt and heavily oxidized, yet Perengini claimed that he'd seen a flash. Right, yes, interesting. Apparently, Passiani wasn't nearly as subtle, and when he saw the bullet, he reportedly yelled, "They put that bullet there when I was in prison." Not a lot I'm going to agree with this dude on, but on this, yeah. Dude, I think so. I think they planted some evidence against you. I mean, I hope you go to prison forever or just get executed because you're a piece of shit, but, you know, also, they planted evidence against you, in my opinion, allegedly. It's also pretty unfortunate for Passiani that it was never fired because, as Mario Spezzi points out, that meant that it lacked the monster's little fingerprint, the unique notch made by the faulty firing pin in its Beretta 22. Yet Perengini claims that the unexploded bullet was irrefutable proof that Passiani was the Monster of Florence, and he was arrested and charged with 14 murders and 5 charges of corpse mutilation on the 12th of January 1993. The trial of the peasant farmer. Pietro Passiani's murder trial started on the 14th of April 1994 and lasted for 6 months. Throughout his trial, he maintained his innocence and apparently rocked in his seat throughout, all while exclaiming, "I'm a sweet little lamb, I am here like Christ on the cross." You were convicted of doing horrible shit to your family. You are not a sweet little lamb. Even if you're not the Monster of Florence, you're a monster of a different breed. Perengini and his team of public prosecutors presented all the evidence they'd gathered against Passiani and displayed it in the courtroom like some modern art exhibition. They included the centerfold from the porn magazine, the image of a woman biting down on a rose, the photos of Passiani posing with weapons, and the 2 World War II shells. Is it weird to have World War II shells as vases? I think that's, I don't know. I think it sounds quite interesting to me to have a big shell as a vase. I mean, that's pretty cool. The focus of the whole display, of course, was the weird-ass painting that had signed and titled A Science Fiction Dream. Perengini loudly told the court that his expert had concluded that the painting was proof of Passiani's demented mind, but just a few days later, La Nación published an article explaining that Passiani hadn't been the artist. The painting had actually been created by Chilean artist Christian Olivares. According to the article, he'd been outraged to hear that the painting was used as evidence against a suspect in a murder trial. Yeah, I was thinking, this painting sounds pretty elaborate. Can't we just work out, can he actually paint? Dude, can he, because I guess he could just fake not being able to paint, but interesting. According to the article, Christian told Mario Spezzi that, quote, "In this painting, I wanted to present the grotesque horror of a dictatorship. To say it is the work of a psychopath is ridiculous. It would be like saying the disasters of war by Goya indicated he was a madman, a monster who needed to be locked up." The prosecution didn't have any physical evidence that could tie Bassini to the murders, so they attacked his character instead. They had his 2 daughters stand up in court and explain how their father had abused them for years, how he'd started to sexually assault them when they were little. Passiani's daughters painted him as a monster of a man who'd get drunk and beat them if they refused to sleep with him, and when the defense asked them if they'd ever seen their father handle a revolver, they denied it. They'd never seen him come home covered in blood. He didn't usually stay out late at night. He'd never even mentioned the murders, not even when he was drunk. The public prosecutor had also... Wait, is our new guy getting completely railroaded? Because it started off really, really solid, and then there was the turn where the evidence was planted, and now they're just it's him. But I'm beginning to doubt that it really was him, because there's a lot of weird stuff happening now. The public prosecutor also managed to track down some of Passiani's friends, men who Mario Spezzi describes as, quote, "mostly country bumpkins, uneducated, ruined by bad wine and whoring." If only they'd been drinking that good wine, everything would have been fine. That's what I live by. It's fine I drink a lot of wine. It's good wine. It's good wine. It's not that rot gut. It's fine. One of them, a man called Mario Vanni, told the court that he and Passiani were picnicking friends or snack buddies, and they often went hunting or fishing together. He bumbled his way through his testimony and repeatedly contradicted everything he'd already told the court, and whenever he got confused, he'd keep on repeating that he and Passiani were just picnicking friends, which is how he earned himself a spot as murder suspect number 2. He sounds just really dim. But the prosecution's star witness was a man named Lorenzo Nessi, who Mario Spezzi describes as, quote, "thin and smarmy with slicked back hair and Ray-Bans, shirt unbuttoned, gold chains dangling among his chest hair, a smooth talker, and small-time ladies' man." You see, Lorenzo had a gift. He just happened to be always in the right place at the right time. Like that one time Passiani hunted pheasants with a revolver instead of his usual hunting rifle. And wouldn't you know, that revolver looked a lot like a .22 caliber Beretta. Railroaded. So this is... oh my. And then there was the one time that he was driving near the spot where the French tourists were murdered. It was Sunday night. He's sure of it. And while he was driving, he was cut off by this other reckless driver in a reddish car who just happened to resemble old Pietro Passiani. Of course, he didn't think much of it until he heard that the monster had struck again, and then he, of course, realized that Pietro Passiani had to be the monster. So what if Pietro didn't own a red car, but a white one? It didn't matter. It does matter. It's really important. This guy, I hate him. He's a piece of shit. But they are railroaded as on this guy. Quoting again, Nesi's testimony put Passiani within a kilometre of the Scopetti clearing on Sunday night, and that was enough to seal Passiani's fate. The judges convicted Passiani of murder and condemned him to 14 life sentences. In their opinion, the judges explained Nessie's mistake by the fact that the reflection of the taillights at night made the white car look red. Not bad. Not bad. They acquitted Passiani of the 1968 murders as prosecutors had presented no evidence linking him with that crime, beyond the fact that it was committed with the same gun. The trial of the snack buddies. Now, in Italy, any person who'd received a life sentence is allowed to appeal their case in front of a brand new court and panel of judges, and in 1996, Pietro Passiani was allowed to argue his case in court once again. Their prosecutor was Piero Toni, and it was his job to ensure that Pietro Passiani's conviction was upheld. But bless him, because Piero Toni reportedly read through the case files, reviewed the evidence against Pietro Passiani, and then said, "This investigation, if it weren't so tragic, would put it in the mind of the Pink Panther." According to Mario Spezzi, quoting again, "Instead of prosecuting Passiani, Toni used his time in court to criticize the investigation and deprecate the evidence against Passiani, taking it apart with ruthless logic piece by piece until not one brick of evidence was left standing on top of another." Whoa. The prosecution just acted as the defense, because he's like, this guy's he's not guilty of this. The cops got railroaded as The quote continues, "Passiani's lawyers, seeing all their arguments usurped by the prosecution, could do little but sit in stunned silence, and when their turn came, express their amazed agreement with the prosecution." He's bang on, Your Honor. The quote continues, "The case against Passiani," he said, "contained no evidence, no clues, no proof. There were no pieces of a pistol connecting him to the killings. There were no bullets planted in the garden capable of convicting. There wasn't a single witness in which he could believe. There was nothing." For Toni, the fundamental fact of the accusation remained unaddressed. Nowhere did investigators explain how the infamous .22 Beretta used in the 1968 murder passed from Sardinian clan into Passiani's hands. End quote. It was starting to look like Passiani was going to walk away from his appeal, acquitted of all charges, but of course the police couldn't have that. They had their man, and they would be damned before they allowed him to walk away scot-free. Enter Chief Inspector Michele Guittari. He had taken over the Monster of Florence case files in October 1995, and while he'd been preparing for Passiani's appeal, he'd realized that Ruggero Perugini's investigation into the murders had left a lot of loose ends just waving about in the wind. Like the forensic reports from Wilhelm Meyer and Uwe Rusch's murder, which suggested that there had been more than one shooter, and Lorenzo Nessi's claims that when he'd seen Pietro Passiani on the night of September the 8th, 1985, he hadn't been alone in the car. There'd been someone with him. An accomplice, maybe. And that's where ends murder suspect number 2, Mario Vanni. Vanni was tracked down and arrested the same morning the appeals court announced that Pietro Passiani had been acquitted of all charges and was now a free man. However, the newspapers reported that according to the police, their new suspect had actually been Passiani's accomplice, and that they had 4 witnesses who were willing to testify that they'd seen one of the murders take place. These witnesses were only referred to as Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta to protect their identities, but according to Mario Spezzi, quote, "They turned out to be quite a collection of half-wits and lowlifes. Alpha was a mentally disabled man named Pucci. Gamma was a prostitute named Girabelli, in the final stages of alcoholism, known to turn a trick for 25-cent glass of wine. Delta was a pimp named Gali. Of them all, Beta would be the most important, as he had confessed to helping Passiani murder the French tourists. His name was Giancarlo Lotti, and he came from the same town as Vanni, San Cassiano. Everyone in San Cassiano knew Lotti. He maintained himself in a fallacious state of inebriation, consuming 2 liters of wine a day. More on holidays, holy dude. It's a lot of wine. Chief Inspector Michele Guittari worked hard to build up the evidence he needed to prove, once again, that Pietro Passiani was indeed the Monster of Florence. He also may, or may not have told his 4 new witnesses exactly what he needed them to say, and ensured that their stories matched the evidence the police had collected to a T. This is super up. But then Pietro Passiani went and died of a heart attack on the 22nd of February 1998. Oh no! However, that didn't stop Chief Inspector Guittari from insisting that his accomplices still had to face justice for their actions. Yeah, I mean, fair. I mean, if they're actually guilty of something. The entire trial was a farce, though, and I'm not even going to attempt to explain all the craziness that went on there. Basically, the prosecution suggested that Passiani and his accomplices had all been part of a satanic cult. And their version of what had happened during the monster's reign of terror gave birth to even more conspiracy theories than I care to discuss. You're more than welcome to go and read the Wikipedia page on the case if you want to know more about that. What you should know is that by the time the trial was conducted, Mario Varni and Giancarlo Lotti were both found guilty of 8 double murders. Varni was sentenced to life and Lotti received 30 years. As far as I know, they both had to serve full terms. The case officially closed, and the Italian police had no further interest in trying to figure out who the Monster of Florence really was. Oh my god, guys. But if you put someone away for the crime, then you stop investigating the crime, and if the person is... Come on! Il Monstro di Firenze. This has been one of the most frustrating scripts I've ever worked on, yeah. And that is in part due to there being just so much information available on the case. The website monstrodifirenze.com is probably the most comprehensive source on the case, as well as the best example of independent and impartial investigative journalism that I've ever seen. I've easily spent more than 55 hours working on this script, and the majority of that time was spent paging through the website, reading through some of the information they'd compiled over the years, and copying over some of the Italian articles into an AI translator if I thought they might include some interesting information. The website also included transcriptions of old case files, the old articles from contemporary newspapers, small biographies on every single person whose name is mentioned in the police reports, and photos of the crime scenes. There's a lot more to this case than I've explained here. Dozens of books have been written about it, movies have been made about it, and there are at least a dozen people who've been identified as having been the real Monster of Florence. They include Salvatore Vinci's son from his first marriage, a gynecologist named Francesco Narducci, a man named Joseph Joe Bevilacqua. And old Joe is an interesting one because the man who suggested that he was the Monster of Florence also claimed that Joe was both the Zodiac Killer and the Monster of Florence. I doubt that we'll ever know who the real Monster of Florence was, but even though he's probably dead now, he continues to live on in pop culture, and he definitely made a huge impact on Italian culture. But not everyone is going to remember the names of his victims, and by now, most of the people who had known them have passed away. So I want to end this script by remembering the people whose lives he'd so brutally stolen away all those years ago. Pascal Gentacor, Stefania Pettini, Carmela D'Annunzio, Giovanni Foggi, Susanna Cambi, Stefano Baldry, Antonella Miglerini, Paolo Menardi, Wilhelm Meyer, Uwe Rusch, Pia Rattini, Claudio Stefanazzi, Dean Morio, and Jean-Michel Cramascelli. Rest in peace. Thank you for watching.